Okay, are we ready?
Yep.
Okay. It is 6:30 and I'd like to call the meeting of the Finance and Administration Committee to order. Again, in consideration of the COVID-19 social distancing recommendations, this meeting will be held virtually via Zoom. The public is invited to participate and will be allowed to make comments through the online chat feature. Please note that these comments are visible to the entire group. If you wish to make a public comment, please state your name and city of residence for the record and be conscientious of others trying to speak. This meeting will be recorded and posted on the city's website at www.missionks.org. Please contact the administration offices at 913-676-8350 with any questions or concerns. We are considering a revised agenda tonight to consider discussion item number 12. Do we have a motion to consider the agenda as presented? Audrey, please call the vote. Oh, excuse me. We need the motion first. My apologies. Does anyone want to make a motion?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I move that the committee approve the revised agenda as presented.
Second.
Okay. Audrey, please call for the vote.
Right. Boltinghouse,
Aye.
Thomas,
Aye.
Inman,
Aye.
Rothrock,
Aye.
Kring,
Aye.
Flora,
Aye.
Davis,
Aye.
oh, thank you. Schlosmacher,
Aye.
thank you. Motion carried.
Great. Thank you, Audrey. Next are public hearings and public comments. We do not have any public hearings or public presentations this evening, so we will move into our action items. First action item is the acceptance of the Finance and Administration Committee minutes from Audrey McClanahan.
Thank you. Yes, these are presented here are the November 4th Finance and Administration Committee minutes. It was also brought to our attention that there was a name that needed to be changed on who led the meeting that night. So that's been fixed and it's been updated. So thank you.
Great. Next, the next item is a recommended 2021 legislative priorities with little government relations. And Laura Smith, would you please provide us with an update on this item?
Yes, but I'm going to ask, can we just back up and with the change that has been made and recognizing who chaired the meeting, do we want to just formally accept the minutes
Yeah.
from November 4th?
Yes, I accept.
Yeah.
I accept them. Accept the minutes as modified.
Thank
Audrey,
you.
You want to call the vote? Do we need to vote on that, Laura?
No, you don't need to vote on that. We just need
Thank
to
you.
have the recommendation on the record.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Well, and I know that Stuart and Mallory are on with us, or I saw them on with us. Oh, there they are.
Yeah.
Hi. I was looking for names and not faces, but glad to see your faces. Each year, I think everyone knows we have historically prepared a legislative program which outlines our priorities and areas of interest or concern for the upcoming legislative session. And that program is then shared with our state legislators. Last year, you'll recall that we engaged LGR to assist us with advocacy and just sort of information tracking. And the council recently renewed that contract for the 2021 session. One of the things that we wanted to do, or that came out of some of our discussions in recent years, is that we wanted to get our program done a little earlier than we had in the past. So we took the opportunity at the November 4th committee meeting to review our 2020 program and look at, I also provided information on the league statement of municipal policy. And some of you had provided input and suggestions for modifications to that program for 2021. What we have done since the November meeting is work with Stuart and Mallory to sort of update that 2021 program for your final review and consideration. Oftentimes, we have the benefit of seeing many of the other legislative programs from other cities in Johnson County, so we can be either consistent in language or looking at areas where we might either agree or disagree with certain priorities. Most folks are in the process as we are. So there may be some additional information on other programs coming forward in the next week or two. But what we have for you this evening is the recommended, or at least a starting point for discussion for our 2021 program. We included both red line and clean copies in your packet, and would certainly be happy to answer any questions. I don't know that it's efficient for me to go through each of the various positions or priorities, but if there are specific ones that the council would like to discuss or would like to see more information or potential changes on, please, why don't we start there?
Dolly?
Madam Chair? Oh,
Dolly,
Can
go
you
ahead.
go ahead?
I just needed a point of clarification on the items that have been removed. Is that because the legislature has already adopted those elements? I just wanted some clarification on the decision to remove, restore local control of right-of-way, the tobacco 21 item. Were those because the state has already adopted statute to that effect?
Stuart, do you want to take that one or do you want me to?
Hello, good evening. I think the issue, the right-of-way issue, I think between the video bill last year and the telecom bill the year before, I'm not saying there aren't any right-of-way issues left, but I think these were both, that language on the local control of the right-of-way was part of what was going on while the telecom and the video industry were doing the work that they wanted to do on the terms of your authority to control the right-of-ways. That I think is the explanation for that. The tobacco issue, everybody was getting geared up to do tobacco T21 at the state level to implement that when the feds increased the age for purchasing tobacco to 21, which kind of removed that issue from the policy perspective as well.
It did not, did it address the vaping products though?
No, it did not.
No.
And it did not deal with flavor cigarettes. I don't know if that was part of it or not.
I don't think it was.
Yeah.
Because I think that still seems to be an issue in terms of vaping in the state. And I would like to have some remnant of that remain in terms of our position.
And I think we need to probably discuss that further and take a vote on it then, because I completely disagree. I think we've had this conversation before and my stance hasn't changed at all. If someone's a legal adult, they should be able to buy products that are legal for legal adults. So I know the federal government's passed some restrictions on that. That's out of our hands, but.
Okay, the other
If you want to
question,
discuss it, we can take a vote on it or whatever, but I know I'm not the only one that's opposed to that, so.
that's fine, Nick. The other question I had was the safe use of bicycles and scooters on public streets. That was removed.
I'm probably not the right person to answer that, but I don't know if you all thought that might have been redundant if the IKE program addresses that at all. I think it does maybe a little bit, but I'll defer to somebody else on that.
That just, I don't think has been something that has sort of been at the top of the list. We can certainly revise or add something along those lines back in, but I think, part of our goal every year is to, try to keep this as fresh with what we think the really key issues may be for us, in hopes that we'll be able to maybe communicate more effectively those that are true, priorities for us. I think we haven't seen this necessarily materialize. And I don't know if Dan Madden has any other thoughts on that, but
My only question is the rationale for removal. And if it's not felt that this is a priority, I'm okay with that. I just had a question about that.
yeah, I think
If the people from Stuart's group, if you guys can speak at all to how you actually used any of this data last year or any of our positions last year to actually inform any of your conversations that you maybe had. Was there anything you actually pulled from it that you wouldn't have touched on anyway at the state level, I guess?
Yeah, I'll answer that. I would just note for the record, we didn't make any recommendations to take things off of we meaning Mallory and I, to take things off of the platform. We've been in consultation with Laura and been working through wordsmithing and those kinds of things. And there are some things that needed to be changed and updated after the transportation plan, for example, is probably the best example. In terms of things that we used, I think a lot of what we were doing was in conversations that we were having with legislators in two capacities that I just recall off the top of my head. Had to do, number one, with the right-of-way issue in the telecom, the cable industry. That was something that we spent a lot of time and energy talking with folks about, number one. The other one was on the very active conversation we had with regard to the tax lid and the changes that were taking place, the conversations that were taking place in the bills that were being introduced with regard to what needed to happen in particular to property taxes. And so it was a useful to have that to reference when we were engaged in conversations about what was coming out of the Senate Tax Committee and what was making its way through the process. So at the very top, those were two things that we made use of the platform as a tool to be part of what you all were had put forward as a policy priority.
And, I guess to follow up on that a little bit, is there anything that that you talked about or approached differently with the city of Mission that you wouldn't have approached the same way with other cities at the state level with any of the legislature?
I think a couple of things that I would say is that people that are doing this work and for cities all over the state are having the same conversations about preserving and protecting local authority and local control over what the decisions you all want to make and on property tax lid, on the right-of-way, control of the right-of-way. I think there were conversations that we had, and Mallory, you can jump in if you want, but there were folks that were more interested in acquiescing to the telecom industry or the cable industry on the right-of-way bill, and we're negotiating things. And part of what we had been using the platform for was talking about wanting to retain that authority. And a lot of the conversations that we had with your staff was the amount of workload that had already been required to deal with the telecom and what that would be if we had to do the same work for the cable industry. So we probably had a little bit more of a focused conversation, less about what can we negotiate with and more about what do we want to preserve. I think that's in particular one place where set us off a bit differently from maybe some of the other cities.
Debbie, I still had a couple questions too.
Go ahead, Charlie. Sure.
Thank you. So first, and Laura tried to send me an explanation on this one, but I think I'm still just being dense. So I had a question on the preserve the ability to advocate and educate about, us advocating for the city. And I had a question where it says should have the same rights and responsibilities as private interest lobbyists. I just wondered about the responsibilities language, since private lobbyists have to register, etc., and presumably we want to avoid that. And so that responsibilities wording kind of hung me up. So I was wondering if you could just explain that one.
I'm trying to pull up and see.
It's on page 4 of
Right.
the
Yeah, sorry.
legislative program. And and Stuart can jump in again. And in many cases where we revised and updated this, I went back to, because it has been a fairly consistent practice for us to look at the league statement of policy and sort of mirror that language. And so this language was directly pulled from that, but I'll let Stuart elaborate kind of on maybe what that means or doesn't mean.
Yeah, and there have been off and on efforts for probably the last 6 to 8 years with various efforts in Topeka by legislators and by several other activities where they were attempting to prohibit and having conversations about prohibiting public entities, local units of government, school districts, universities, community colleges, any of those folks having the ability to use your resources to secure advocacy and monitoring and reporting services. The argument has been made and is true that anybody of you all as council members or your staff can go to Topeka and testify on a bill and speak in either your personal, professional capacities, and you don't have to register as a lobbyist. Part of what the desire was, and a lot of this was related to, frankly, the Montoy school finance lawsuit. The critics of the system did not want school districts to have lobbyists and do advocacy work in Topeka, and they lumped local governments in with that conversation. And so this is fairly standard language, and I think this is the language that, as Laura suggested, coming out of that. The issue is that by state law, there was a desire to not allow you to have advocacy at the same level that a private entity might be able to have. You would either have to hire a full-time person to do the work, or you would not be, and they wouldn't be able to register to lobby under some of the proposals that were a couple of years old. So that's basically the gist of it. The idea was to not allow you to make use of resources that are available to anyone else.
Okay, that makes sense. The other question I had was on page 8, which is on the municipal court edition. And I was just hoping staff could maybe speak to their thought about the need for that, both in general or as a city priority. I have concerns from a defendant's rights perspectives about the increasing use of municipal court video. I think that there's something lost, as we all know. A Zoom meeting isn't like a live meeting. Just think if you had a felony appearance and now you had to do it by telephone or video instead of getting your day in court, you know, how that would make you feel. And so I was just hoping maybe staff could speak to this inclusion, because I'm personally, you know, currently opposed to it.
I think that, again, this is something that was taken out of the league's statement of municipal policy. And I think from our perspective, looking at it just from, you know, experiencing the pandemic as we have this year and trying to adjust and still be able to deliver some of those services and having the flexibility to do that through an increased use of audiovisual technology, you know, was beneficial from that perspective.
Yeah, and I think I would be fine with it if we tied it to a state of emergency, but just sort of having general support for increased use gives me some concern.
Hillary, do you want to go ahead with your question?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I just had a question for Stuart. Last year, you had mentioned that there were a handful of, or at least a couple of conflicts between our platform and your lobbying capacity based on some other clients you have. And I was just going to see if that's the same case this year.
Last year, I made note of the issue with regard to legalization of marijuana. And I think that because we represent an organization called the Behavioral Health Association of Kansas that is comprised of substance use disorder treatment providers. And that association is not, and I wanted to just be aware that you all to be aware that that was a potential issue, but in the legislative platform that they have now, they are not opposed to legalization, but wanting to ensure that resources are invested in treatment and that's an important part of it. So I think that was an issue that I wanted you to be aware of last year, because I don't think they were in the same spot that we are now this year from their perspective, in that the awareness of, being surrounded and what is happening is that at some level, resources and an emphasis on treatment and recovery and getting folks to services is a big part of it. So they are not contrary to what you are saying in the platform this year.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, I'd like to circle back on the issue of the tobacco products to make sure that that we take at least a straw vote on this to determine whether to retain some elements of that, including vapor products, paraphernalia, and distribution of flavored vaping products. I'd like to see that still remain, even though the Tobacco 21 has already been included in federal legislation.
Okay.
So I don't know if you need a motion or how you want. Excuse me?
Are you wanting to take a straw poll vote now, or are you wanting just Stuart to take that back with him?
No,
No, I think we need to discuss. I mean, I think on several of these points, it's difficult from our perspective to make potential revisions without some additional discussion.
Okay.
I just know that the Chamber of Commerce and both Kansas City, Missouri and KCK have been discussing, elements about vaping products and flavored products that are encouraging use by minors. And so I'd like to see that be retained.
And according to the federal government on the FDA site, because I wanted to go back and reread it, it does say that it's illegal for any retailer to sell any tobacco product, including cigarettes, cigars, and e-cigarettes, to anyone under 21. So what are we really talking about?
Say that again.
On the FDA site, fda.gov, it says right here, it is now illegal for any retailer to sell any tobacco product, including cigarettes, cigars, and e-cigarettes, to anyone under 21. This new federal minimum age of sale applies to all retail establishments and persons with no exception. It's on the FDA site.
I'm sorry.
I think what Nick's saying is that the federal Tobacco 21 includes vaping products.
And that was my understanding when Trump passed the executive order for it, because they put this into place like early this year. It might have even been December of last year.
Well,
I don't know if there's some misunderstanding there, but from what I understood the whole time is it covered all that. And according to the FDA site that I'm looking at right now, and anybody can pull up, I can send the link in the chat if that helps. It's right there. E-cigarettes are included with that.
Perhaps Laura, staff could do some additional research, and then at our council meeting, if you find that there's still, there is something else, then at that time we could, do a straw poll to add or not, and then vote at that time. Just potential solution.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We can do some additional research on that.
I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt, but just on the page, it says right here, under commonly asked questions, what are the list of tobacco products covered by the new law? And it says the T21 law applies to sale of tobacco products, including cigarettes, smokeless tobacco, hookah tobacco, cigars, pipe tobacco, electronic nicotine delivery systems, including e-cigarettes and e-liquids, to anyone under 21 years of age. That's in the link that I just put into the chat. It's the FDA site. So
The only thing that I'm raising a question about is the issue of flavored vaping products.
if it
Which-
contains tobacco, it's covered. Like it says it right on the FDA site. Flavored or not, if it contains tobacco, it's already covered.
I think what was in our platform last year, though, Nick, was a broader advocacy for prohibiting or flavored vaping products for anyone. It's a standalone sentence in the platform last year, so that might be what Ken's trying to get after.
Well, I know that that's an issue that's being discussed regionally, and so that's why I think it's important for us to at least take a position on this. Whether my recommendation to retain it fails, that's up to the council to decide.
I guess I'm still confused. What are we trying to retain? The federal government has already passed this.
The
I
second
think if I
sentence
think
of
if
our
I'm
platform.
I think if I'm understanding, then it is not an age restriction. It is
You want
a
to ban altogether?
banned altogether. Is
Okay.
the way I'm interpreting that. So is that what I'm
That is
understanding?
correct. Yes.
Okay.
And what reason? So we want to advocate for legalizing marijuana, but a total ban on flavored cigarettes.
Well, you recall that
Okay.
I was against the legalization of marijuana.
Fair enough.
But can we come back and revisit this maybe?
Yeah, in the interest of time, perhaps we could, see what staff's recommendation is and then, discuss it more at the next meeting.
Right. In respect to both people, we want to look at it a little bit and see what's going on. And I want to go up and look at the website too. So,
Sure.
okay,
Okay. Thank
And
you.
then
go ahead.
I was gonna say, so Laura, do we need to revisit my municipal court concerns too and see if anyone else shares them or wants to keep it? Or, my recommendation would be that we modify it and say we support it in, times of emergency or times of, disaster or whatever mirrors the
I'm with you. On
public
that.
health.
I'm with you on that one, Solly. I think people deserve their day in court.
So I don't know if there's a consensus to limit it to sort of those circumstances and add language to that effect, or.
I'm okay with that too.
I'm good with that.
Okay. We can look at some language for that. And then I know, Sally, were you finished? I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, I think I still don't fully understand the other piece, but if everyone else does, then I'm good. And the league had it in, I'm good.
The other piece of,
The lobbyist question, I'm still,
Okay.
the responsibilities language still kind of trips me up, but it's okay.
well, I guess my question would be there, if we took out the word responsibilities and just left in the same rights as private interest lobbyists, would that allay the concern you have?
That would make more sense to me personally, but I'd be worried that I'm missing something. I don't know if maybe you could just ask the league on that one
Sure.
too.
Absolutely.
Okay.
The only other thing that I had any feedback on was on page 6. Top of page 6, the recognition of financial risks posed by climate change. And I think, and the only feedback that I'd had was just a concern about on the 4th line down, the commitment to rapidly decarbonizing. And what potentially does rapidly mean, or how do we quantify that?
That was my item, and I think if we could just remove the word rapidly, I think we support it, but I think each of those situations needs to be based on a reasoned approach, not based on speed.
Yeah, and Laura, I had sent you some proposed revised language on that, and now I'm having a hard time pulling it up, I think, for a suggestion, because I know we had an exchange on that when you shared that concern. But now
I can't, yeah, and
I think I said,
I'll think about it.
No, but then I said something like, instead, sorry, state investment in and committed progress towards decarbonizing.
That'd be-
So instead of rapidly,
Right.
it would just say state investment in and commitment to committed progress towards. Would that be okay with you, Mayor?
Again,
Because that's not a speed
Yeah.
thing. That's just making
right.
forward
I think,
progress.
I think each of those needs to be based on a business case. And again, so that's my point. It's just, it needs to be based on a business case. If it makes business sense to do it that way, and business being a broader term than just business, it's planet also, but if it makes sense to do it, then we should do it. It shouldn't be based on speed or a desire just to move forward.
Well,
I mean, I think there's a lot of evidence as to the need. I would be okay with modifying it to committed progress rather than rapidly, but I do think that there needs to be forward momentum on that topic, and I think there's a broad consensus among environmental groups that that needs to be the case.
I'm just suggesting you remove the word rapidly, and I'd
And
be fine with that
I
statement.
concur with the mayor, because anytime you're defining something through measure, it's a relative term, and that causes chaos. So I agree with the mayor.
So would it just be commitment to decarbonizing and just
Right.
rapidly out?
Right.
Okay.
What about decarbonize, not decarbonizing?
That's acceptable. Carbonize, that's fine.
That doesn't make any difference to me.
Yeah, as long as we're maintaining the spirit that this needs to happen from,
Right.
you know, the science that's out there about it, I'm okay with those changes too.
All right. Solly, do you have anything else to add on that?
No, I think it's the forward progress that matters, that I think really matters. So I think if we have the commitment in there, then that's fine.
Okay, anybody have anything else for Stuart or Mallory while we're on this issue? Okay, let's move forward. Thank you, Stuart, and thank you, Mallory. Okay, let's go to our third item, which is the Mission Bowl project. Tonight, we will be reviewing the ordinance establishing the Rock Creek Tax Increment Financing District 3A and approving the project plan for Mission Bowl, along with the resolution of intent for the industrial revenue bonds and draft redevelopment agreement. Laura Smith, would you please provide us with a report on this item?
Yes, thank you. And just to kind of kick this off, I don't recognize all of the names on here, but just for the record, we will be, and I'll touch on this again later, but we will be having a second follow-up committee meeting next Wednesday to discuss in more detail kind of the final pieces of the negotiations with the developer as it relates to the incentive. So that's why we don't have and didn't have it for your packet this evening, kind of a final analysis and report from Mr. Kimmel, our financial advisor. But we did want to keep this on the agenda tonight, maybe in a more abbreviated form, just so that you have more time to think about. We wanted to share with you the draft of the development agreement and that ordinance that would ultimately, as we continue on this schedule, be in front of you on December 16th. And so what we'd like to do, I mean, I think the ordinance is fairly self-explanatory. We've talked about on several occasions the fact that, the developer has submitted a TIF project plan, which requires a public hearing, which the council set for the December 16th council meeting. Ultimately, that TIF project plan would have to be approved as part of this process. And again, that TIF project plan is kind of the high level overview, doesn't include those things that we may have negotiated or that the council goals and objectives that they want to see as a part of that project. That occurs through the redevelopment or development agreement, which is ultimately the contract between the city and the developer with respect to the project. So the ordinance the public hearing is required on two pieces, on the TIF project plan and also on the further division of Rock Creek TIF District number 3. And this would be separating out several of the parcels that were, when we, in 2019, divided that Rock Creek district into smaller. This one would separate this out and create Rock Creek TIF District 3A. And then in connection with all of this, the developer has also made application for the use of industrial revenue bonds, or IRBs, solely for the purpose of sales tax exemption on construction materials. And in order to proceed with that, the city would consider a resolution of intent. So since at our November 4th meeting, Mr. Kimmel presented some information in terms of where we were in the negotiations with the developer, and some tentative deal points that had been agreed to with respect to an affordable housing component, and then a revenue sharing component of that TIF revenue stream. The council had some questions and some goals related to some sustainability issues. And so following up after that November 4th meeting, I've had the opportunity with our team and the developers team to engage in some conversations with representatives from the U.S. Green Building Council to share some additional information. I think it's fair to say we've made significant progress in that area, and that's the information that we'll be bringing forward to you in much more detail next week. But what we thought we would do, and so you saw in the development agreement a placeholder for the sustainability provision. So that's something that would need to be revised and amended as a part of our conversation next week. So I think what I would do is just, we have Kevin Wimpy with Gilmore and Bell, Pete Heaven with Spencer Fain, and Bruce Kimmel with Ellers, who are here with us this evening. And wanted to use this opportunity, if you have questions about provisions of the development agreement. What we tried to do was kind of point you to the specific paragraphs or sections of the development agreement that contained some of those already or tentative deal points. So you didn't have to dig through all of that if you didn't want to. But if you have questions about the development agreement, certainly let's look at those this evening. And what we can answer tonight, we can do, and what we can't answer tonight, we can certainly follow up on next week. And then if there are any other questions about the remaining process, now is a good time for us to talk about that, so that we have the direction in the coming 2 weeks to really get this wrapped up for you all.
Solly. Go ahead, Solly.
I did actually have a couple questions on the ordinance, if we could jump to that maybe first. I just had a couple questions where we're making specific findings, just to make sure we have those findings squared away. So I was looking at section 2, where it's talking about the percentage body of the land area as opposed to the whole district, so as not to impact the base assessed value. And so I just wanted to double check that, someone had done the math on that, because I certainly haven't. And if we're making a finding, I just wanted to check on that piece. And similarly, that in section 3, that this is necessary to move forward with the development agreement. And so I was wondering if just maybe Pete could touch on those pieces.
May actually be Kevin. I don't know whether it's Peter or
Okay.
Kevin to address that piece of it.
Probably Kevin's better suited to address those questions.
Sure, yeah. Good evening, Kevin Wimpy with Gilmore and Bell, the city's bond counsel. Right, so the 15% threshold there, making that finding, as you rightly pointed out, it relates to the base value of the TIF district. And that's the threshold where if you remove an amount of land above 15%, it resets the base, and below that, the base stays the same. So the map on Exhibit A to the ordinance shows the 2 parcels that are being removed. And I don't have the math handy on the square footage or acreage. We can certainly find the spreadsheet pretty quickly, but you can see that the 2 parcels being removed are what I'll refer to as the cell tower site there, and then the Johnson County wastewater lift station at the very south end. And so for tonight's purposes, I guess just eyeballing those, and it's the 15% threshold relates to the entire, what is TIF District 3 currently. So it's the entire blue outline portion on the ordinance there. So does that help for now?
Yeah, that makes sense that it's the whole thing, not the revised. Yeah, that makes sense.
Right, yep.
Any other questions?
Madam Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Trent.
Thanks. I had a question probably around section 211. Last meeting in the redevelopment agreement, last meeting I kind of raised the issue on what happens if you get a tenant coming in at the end of the life cycle of that 20 years and the affordable piece. And then I didn't see anything, and it just with the day or so that we had to look over this, I didn't see anything in the language addressing that. And I didn't know if either I missed it somewhere or if we could talk to that more, if there's been any progress on that front.
Is the issue having a continuation of the tenancy past the 20 years?
Yeah, we had kind of discussed, not just having an overnight reversal to market
Sure.
rates on kind of the expiration of that agreement. And I wanted to have some sort of protection in there, if possible, for those tenants coming in late of that 20-year agreement, so they weren't just thrown out to the wash the next year on market.
It's a good point, and I will address it in the next draft.
Okay.
Anybody else?
I know Solly has several questions on, did anybody else have any questions on the ordinance while we were there? Okay.
Holly, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So I just had, as Laura mentioned, several questions on the development agreement, and some of them I could send more specifics on detail, but can just flag some of the numbers for you. So on section 204 and section 206, and then there are a couple of other provisions as well where it's trying to lock in the developer to that project schedule, and is dealing with what they do or have to do to commit to that schedule. And so I was just wondering, if we think we've got the best language we're going to get on those pieces, or is there anything that we can do in terms of a clawback or anything to really make sure that, forward progress continues to be made on the project once it starts, because there are some other developments we've had where that's been a problem. And sort of relatedly, anything about what to do with incomplete structures or anything like that. I just really want to make sure we have those issues buttoned up as well as we could. And like I said, I think that appears in some other places as well. And I can send specifics on that, but that was sort of just an overall concern I have, was that we're really, tying them to a schedule. And then I had one question on 211D that seemed kind of like, I don't know, welfare queen-like to me. So there's a piece about checking the types of vehicles owned by the people who are in the affordable housing residences. And that just seemed kind of weird to me, and kind of stereotypical about, are there people who are trying to cheat the system and have these flashy cars, or I don't know, it just kind of sat wrong with me. I didn't know if there was a specific reason or if that came from a different agreement that's been worked on with that affordable housing piece, but I just kind of sat funny with me.
This is the first time we've tried this type of a provision in a development agreement. We borrowed from some others from other cities, trying to build something that we could work with.
Yeah.
I too had difficulty with that. It was part of the paragraph. I left it in, but I would prefer to take out any reference to vehicles.
Okay, perfect. I'm also on the same page with that. It just sort of, didn't love that. I did have a question about the one-sided termination. So I think that was on 3.02A, where developer can terminate the agreement at any time upon 30 days prior written notice. And the city, doesn't have any sort of corresponding right? And my concern with that was, I think that makes sense if you're talking about a straight TIF district, but I wondered what would happen to the sustainability commitments and the fair housing commitments in that piece, because this agreement is front loaded in favor of the developer, where they get more of the TIF up front and then we get more, it's has the 5-year periods of time. And so maybe they decide the way the balance sheet checks out is if they terminate it at year 15 and quit doing the affordable housing, that's actually a better deal for them. And so I just wanted to make sure that, we aren't losing the sustainability and the affordable housing piece if the developer decides it's better in those later years where they're getting a smaller share to just walk.
Right. And with regard to the affordable housing, that is a separate covenant that will survive termination.
Oh, okay.
So they're locked in for 20 years on that.
Okay.
With regard to sustainability, it was our thought that once the project is completed, they've really, obviously they have to maintain the sustainability elements, but they've really performed what we've asked them to do, and build a sustainable project.
That makes sense then.
And if they do terminate on a 30-day notice, we no longer have to reimburse them for any of their expenditures. The TIF comes to an end and they're on their own.
Thanks,
Okay.
Pete.
Yeah. And on 3.06, I had a question in the first sentence. So this is our right to inspect their records, which I think would include, verifying their project costs. I don't know if it would also include verifying the affordable housing piece or not, but it references 1 year after completion of the project. And I wasn't sure what the definition of completion was in that paragraph, because completion in the next paragraph seems to be about completing, the actual physical building, but I didn't know if completion of the project was completion of whenever the TIF comes to an end. That just wasn't clear to me. So if we'd have the right to inspect for the whole time of the TIF, or just the beginning until it's constructed, or how that would work.
The completion of the project would be the issuance of a certificate of occupancy.
Okay.
That would be when construction is completed, and we have a 1-year period after that that we can inspect to make sure that it was properly constructed.
Okay. And there wouldn't be expenses that are TIF eligible expenses that are new, like after that time, probably.
Right.
Okay.
There shouldn't be any, frankly. I mean, once the project is completed, there's really nothing I can think of that would be TIF eligible that they could incur after that.
Okay. That makes sense. I think those were my big things. I can send you an email. Like I said, I think there were some additional thoughts sort of about I had about locking them into the timing piece, but
okay. Sure, Sally, send me an email. I'll be happy to address all your questions.
And I don't know if we want to touch, I think there are some pieces, I know we moved very quickly through those first questions about the development schedule and, potential clawbacks on the project. And so, the development schedule that's been laid out at this point would have completion of the overall project. I have to look at it. 2023, I think, right?
Yeah, right. August of 2023.
And so that's a pretty tight timeframe. And I understand we've had different experience over multiple years with some of our other projects. But I think there are, opportunities if you meet that schedule that it is potentially, and correct me if I'm wrong, Pete, but that's a potential would trigger an event of default.
Correct.
And so you would have the opportunity there to terminate potentially the agreement in its entirety.
Yeah, I think that was on 9.02, Laura, and I saw the termination remedies, but I didn't see any clawback about existing TIF that we'd already would have paid out. And so I wondered if maybe that be added as another potential remedy or measure to address delay, or if that would even be worthwhile, because maybe at that point, there really hasn't been the TIF billing yet.
So we'll give that some thought. we've never used clawbacks before. I mean, they're used in some instances in other cities. Let me give that some thought, and I'll
Okay.
circle back with you.
Great, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Laura, does this conclude your report?
Yes, I think if there are no other questions, again, this will be, and we'll talk a little bit later, but this will be kind of the primary agenda item that we have next week at our committee meeting.
Good. And thanks, Solly. Some really good questions. I appreciate you bringing those forward. Thanks. Okay, let's move forward to our next item, which is number 4. The next item is the consideration of the city's updated personnel policy and guidelines. And Emily Randel, would you please provide an update for us this evening?
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Green. Each year around this time, we implement any kind of updates or adjustments we would like to see in our city's personnel policies and guidelines. The goal here is to make the changes, improve them in an ordinance, and have that be effective at the beginning of the new calendar year for all of our staff. Our staff does acknowledge the changes in a communication and kind of signs off, and those are the rules of the road adjusted with those changes that we've made. We are tackling in this update some regular kind of wording changes that we always do, and some adjustments mostly throughout to reflect current practice, best practice, things that don't read quite as they've been behaving on the ground, and trying to marry those up to current reality, really, for various reasons, and then just be more specific and more clear about different terms and circumstances throughout the document. The most substantial change, of course, this time is that we are recommending to include paid parental and paid caregiver leave in our policy. This is something that we've talked about over the years now. We discussed it initially as a potential recommendation in December of 2018, moving into 2019. At that time, we didn't move forward with it officially, treated it more as a discussion point and something to consider in the future. We did do an employee benefits survey in the summer of 2020 this year to just gauge interest, and did get interest in both leave policies, and thought that it would be worth bringing forward to you all. We are joined by other entities who are rolling it out in our area, and then of course nationwide as different elections take place, and other groups add it to their policies. Roland Park approved it for this year, and City of Shawnee has it in as well. State of Kansas, Johnson County, City of Kansas City, Missouri. So the list seems to definitely be growing. We have proposed a 6-week leave for adoption, birth, or placement of a foster child. Same for 6 weeks leave in the situation of a primary caregiver situation. So I think that's an overview. If I can take questions.
Great. Anybody have any questions?
I have a question. Do we have any, is that okay, Debbie? Was there anybody? Okay, sorry. I didn't mean to jump right in. Well, first of all, I want to thank staff for recommending this. This has long been something I've prioritized every year, and I'm just really excited to see us having this conversation on paper and what feels like a lot more officially. But I am curious what the anticipated costs are, or if that's something that, we've been able to dig into based on our current employee makeup. And then my other thought was, I know we're looking at our employee handbook in December of every year, but this time next year, I think it'd be really nice to kind of look back on 2021 and just, see if anyone utilized it and how it worked.
Sure, yeah. We did take a look at our staff, always hard to gauge, of course, but we did count among our full-time staff, just capping the age. Of course, it's much easier. You can't use quite the same metrics to gauge caregiver leave, but for paid parental leave, capping the age at 45 and looking at those most likely, which was sort of my back of the napkin decision making about people's family status. We came up with about 29 people, give or take, among our current staff that may be likely to have a child. I'd say that would be generous, but that being the case, In the past 2018, 2019, and 2020 calendar years, 5 of our employees have had a child event related that would be qualified for a paid parental leave. So I think over the course of 3 years, 5 being that number, and of course you'd have to estimate up, you'd have to round up for that type of a number to just truly understand that impact. I mean, of course, new money isn't in play for those employees that are on the payroll. We anticipate to be on the payroll. So in some respects, those are sunk costs, but the demographics and the likelihood, I think that's the breakout that we've arrived at. And then certainly for the look back for 2021, happy to do that. And I wanted to mention too, you all know, and we mentioned in the agenda item that our HR consultant took a look at our recommended changes, and that has happened. And this year she didn't have any substantial changes, but I think language could be tightened in a few areas. So I will be bringing forward a revised upon the revisions just to clarify some language in some places for our business meeting later this month. They'll want to include there too.
Great. Thanks, Emily.
Thanks.
Any other questions for Emily? Okay, thank you so much. Let's move forward. Go ahead,
Do we
Ken. Go ahead.
recommend that we move this to consent agenda?
I would recommend non-consent just so we can highlight this because I think it is a significant achievement for the
That's
city.
fine.
But
Okay, so non-consent.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, let's move to number 5. As a member of the Kansas Eastern Regional Insurance Trust, which is KERIT, the committee will next review the annual renewal for workers' compensation insurance, and that would be Brian Scott. Could you please give us a report on this item this evening?
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, we are a member of the Kansas Eastern Regional Insurance Trust, or KERIT, as we call it. We've been a member since 2009. The trust comprises 18 member cities and counties, mostly in eastern Kansas, a few kind of a mid-state area. The 2021 premiums for the workers' compensation coverage were just received, and they're estimated to be at $149,859. It's a bit of a lump of coal right before Christmas, unfortunately. It is a pretty sizable increase from what we have in the past couple of years. And what's kind of driving a lot of that is our experience modifier. And I put in the report that our experience modifier for 2021 is 1.38. And what the experience modifier is essentially doing, it's identifying the number of claims that a member has put into the pool over the last 3 years. And if you're at a 1, basically the amount that the pool is paying out on those claims is equal to the amount of premium that city is paying into the pool. If you're below 1, your amount that you're paying out is less than the premiums. If you're above 1, the amount that you're paying out is more than the premiums. So in our case, we've had a number of very sizable claims over the last few years, and that's resulted in some big payouts, higher than what we're actually paying in premiums. So it's kind of a rolling 3-year average, and we're now seeing kind of a high point of that roll. So hopefully that will start to turn around a little bit. We did start a safety committee last year. The pandemic, that was kind of a little bit stop and start, but Kathy Stratton, our payroll specialist, has really kind of taken the charge this year, and she's got the committee fired up. I think we're going to have a meeting here after the first year, and we're going to start meeting on a more regular basis, reviewing claims that have been submitted to the pool, worker comp claims, kind of going over those, getting a better understanding of why that accident occurred. You know, there's any training or anything that can be provided to the employees to try to prevent that accident from occurring again in the future, or if it's a condition with the workspace of any kind, trying to address that as well. So hopefully that'll help to get ahead of that and bring that modifier back down. Something else I will add to this, at the end of January, when the current year closes out, we'll do a payroll audit. And so the premiums are based on projected payroll. So when I do the premium calculations in August, I'm looking at that budgeted payroll for 2021. So a year ago, when I did the premiums, that was based on a budgeted payroll for 2020. Well, that budgeted payroll, actual payroll is not going to be what budgeted payroll was anticipated to be. As an example, we didn't open up the pool this summer, so we didn't hire any lifeguards. We have a number of positions through attrition that opened up during the year. And just because of our revenue situation, we decided to put a freeze in those positions. So when we do that payroll audit in January, the actual payroll for 2020 is going to be much less than what we have budgeted and what we have projected premiums on. So I expect we're going to get some kind of credit back on that. And we always take that credit and apply it towards the 2021 premium going forward. So that 149,000 will actually be less when it's all said and done. So that does kind of help ease the pain a little bit, but not a whole lot.
Okay.
That's kind of the report in a nutshell. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
And I would just add just a little bit of perspective. I know oftentimes in my first reaction in looking at a premium increase of 57%, is to pause and take a look. I think that, and it's certainly a percentage increase that then causes you often to say, are we placed with the right, work comp provider or work comp carrier? I think that KERIT has still been a very cost-effective and cost-efficient choice for the city. In the time that we've been a member of that, we previously were covered through the Kansas Municipal Insurance Trust, or KEMIT. And I can tell you that when we transitioned, what was that, however many years ago, 2009, the annual premium at that point would have been almost $130,000. So there have been really significant savings by participating as a member of KERIT over these last, 11 years. And I think that's sometimes the perspective that does get lost when you get hit with a 57% increase in 1 year.
Well, just to kind of add a little bit more to that, a lot of cities and counties will buy workers' compensation insurance in the private marketplace with private carrier. They're not going to give us credit our premium based on a payroll audit. And they're not going to give us any kind of money back or a credit on a year that's closed out. And I think I mentioned that in our staff report down here at the bottom. We've got several $1,000s back the prior year because of the previous year that actually closed out. So that's kind of the advantage of being in a pool where you're sharing the risk with everybody. You're also sharing the reward with them as well.
I just have a quick question, Brian. Do we have an exceptional number of workman's comp cases from this last year?
From the past probably 5 years.
Okay.
The payout on the claims over the last 5 years has added up to about $300,000.
And so it's not necessarily number of claims, it's been severity of claims that have been driving that.
We had one employee that was actually out of workers' comp for several months. We've got a couple of employees that have had injuries to their arms or something like that, and they've never really gained full recovery or full motion of that arm. So they're able to work, they just don't have that full motion that they used to have. So there's a payout in that as well.
We currently have no liability issues with the city as it relates to workman's comp, correct?
No.
Thank you. Anybody have questions for Brian? You want to take this as consent or non-consent?
Consent, please.
Everybody okay with that? Okay. Thank you, Brian. You have the next item as well, item number 6.
I do. This is our annual renewal with Johns County Department of Technology and Innovation. They been providing network support for us for a number of years now. They provide network support for both the police department side of the network as well as the rest of the city side of the network. That's why you see two separate costs. This year for the city side, they're proposing support services of $22,864. For the police, it's $36,698 for a total of $59,562, or a 6% increase over 2020 budget. We have about $100,000 budgeted total for computer services. I know in the past, there's been some questions about using DTI, and is there another solution out there that might be as effective? Mid-America Regional Council actually created a consortium this year consisting of a number of smaller communities like us that don't necessarily have the size or the resources to have their own IT department. So the intent of the consortium was to kind of use economy of scales and maybe contract with a private firm that could provide IT services or support for these smaller communities. We went through a process where we reviewed a number of proposals from different firms. We selected one. Mark then entered into a contract to provide services, and then each city or county would kind of piggyback on that contract. So the firm that was selected is Civic ITC, and they offer something like kind of a turnkey solution where they would essentially take over the entire network. So instead of having a data closet upstairs in the police department with servers and switches, that would go away, and the data closet would be at their facility with their servers and their switches. And you would essentially have a connection to their facility in downtown Kansas City via the internet. And then they would be able to maintain all the equipment, ensure all the licensing and everything is up to date, patches or updates that need to be done to licensing or software, anything like that is on them. It seems kind of convenient, but unfortunately that service is, they quoted us about $112,000 for 1 year, which is quite a bit more than what we're paying through Johnson County DTI. So my recommendation at this time would not to be to pursue that. If that's something that council is still interested in looking into, we could probably create our own request for proposals later this year and seek out more refined definition of services that we want. Or maybe we keep the equipment and we just get somebody that comes in here and provides necessary support for that, much like the county's doing now. So our recommendation would be to renew that contract with DTI for another year for $59,562.
Could I ask Dan Madden, how's the police force focused with this particular internet provider? How are we doing with that, with the computer service?
We're pretty happy. The only issues we ever have is with our mobile data terminals mostly, and that's just some connectivity issues and just responsiveness issues. And but with the day-to-day operations of our network and everything, we don't have any issues.
The big issue with the mobile data terminals was the type of equipment that the police department was using. So when we bought mobile data terminals several years ago, we went to a different piece of equipment made by a different manufacturer, and it was a one-off from what everybody else is doing. And DTI just was not familiar with that piece of equipment and weren't really familiar with the operating software that made that equipment run. And that turned out to be a real struggle and a little bit of a source of conflict frankly, between DTI and some of the folks in the police department. Last year, I came to you with a request for a lease purchase agreement for new police cars and new video equipment and new mobile data terminals. And with that, the police department went back to the standard, good old-fashioned Panasonic Tough Book for their police cars, which is a piece of equipment that everybody uses and everybody knows and understands. And so DTI feels much more comfortable now providing support for that piece of equipment.
Okay, thanks, Brian. Anybody else have any questions on this issue?
I had just one quick question, Debbie.
Sure.
Did the county give any explanation for increasing cost by 6%? That just seemed like a decent 1-year jump. Had it been flat? I can't remember. Was it flat last year, or do we keep seeing?
It's been about 5% a year.
Okay.
So it's not out of line.
Okay,
I have a question.
go ahead, Ken.
Just addressing cybersecurity, does DTI help with that aspect of it?
Yes. Yeah, they run a, I think it's called SharePoint. It's pretty sophisticated software across the network that catches a lot of the issues that we frankly just never see. They just never get to the end user. And then they also provide daily data backup. And their backup servers are actually not at the county facilities, but they're in a cave somewhere in Johnson County offsite. So yeah, they do a pretty good job with the cybersecurity.
Does anybody recommend taking this for consent, or do you want it non-consent?
Consent, I would recommend.
Okay, everybody okay with that? Okay, let's move on to number 7, and that would be Brian again also. This is the issue regarding the 2021 Special Alcohol Tax Fund. And Brian Scott, could you give us an update on that, please?
Yeah, so this is our annual allocation of the Special Alcohol Tax Fund. By state statute, there's a 10% liquor drink tax, alcohol tax that's imposed on the sale of any drink containing alcoholic liquor sold by clubs, caterers, or drinking establishments. The revenue derived from this tax is allocated 30% to the state and 70% to the city or county where the tax is collected. So we get about $210,000. That's what's budgeted for 2021 from the alcohol tax. By state statute, that $210,000 is split evenly 3 different ways. A third of it goes to the general fund, a third of it goes to the special parks fund, and a third of it goes to the special alcohol tax fund for the purpose of funding alcohol awareness and programs to address alcoholism and family issues that may derive from alcohol abuse or drug abuse. We rely on Drug and Alcoholism Council, a program supported by the United Community Services of Johnson County, to kind of allocate those funds out to various organizations, not-for-profit organizations in the county that provide services towards drug abuse prevention and treatment programs. And they solicit grants every year from those programs, and then kind of allocate a portion of the grant request to each of the members participating cities based on population. And that is actually provided in your report in the packet. So total of their grant request for 2021 is $2,024,200, which is actually a 6% reduction from the previous year. And some of this is kind of due to reduced revenues that cities have been anticipating to be receiving because, frankly, because of the pandemic, there's not as many people going to bars and restaurants, so we're just not collecting as much tax as we have in the past. So that's a little bit that reduction that the DAC was anticipating. So our annual allocation would be about $70,000. We are recommending that he renew his contract with the DAC, United Community Services of Johnson County, for 2021. We do have a representative on United Community Services on the line with us. Christina Ashe Goodry. I hope I didn't butcher your name too bad. She's available if we have any questions.
Does anyone have questions for Christina or Brian on the special alcohol tax fund allocations? Go ahead.
Chair.
Go ahead, Solly.
Okay. I just had one question that we had asked the UCS representative for the other fund we participate in. That fund said that there were assurances that the receiving organizations complied with the city's non-discrimination policies, and I just wanted to check and see if there was that same policy from UCS on the alcohol funds.
Absolutely, Council Member Flora. Those same policies apply, and actually many of the same grantees are receiving funds. Again, I know through my work for the continuum of care for emergency service grants from the federal government and CARES Act funding, and those non-discrimination policies apply too. So it's across the board, and it's going to include LGBTQ issues as well as religion, affiliation, so it's pretty intensive.
Trent?
Thanks. I had a question on the sheet. It says that there's 70,000. I guess this question's for Brian. It says that there's $70,000 that'll be proportioned to mission from the alcohol tax fund, but then the dollar amounts that are listed for DARE, mental health, and the agencies by the DAC don't add up to that amount. So I wondered if that was just a typo or if I otherwise had missed something as the first question on that.
Let's see, that's about 15,000 will support.
It's your fund balance. If you look at your action item, we've been carrying a pretty hefty fund balance. And so we increased the allocation this year to be available. So that's why the math doesn't add up.
We haven't been spending the full 15,000 over the last few years, and that plus the fact that our revenue has been going up, with a pretty healthy fund balance in that fund. So
Got it.
Okay.
Revenue this year we're able to cover with the fund balance.
Got it. So I also had one other question. I had a really productive meeting with the police department a couple months back through Interim Chief Madden and Captain Lane. I just want to thank them again for letting me come in and ask them questions. One of the things that we had in that meeting that I really took away as something that was really cool was the mental health co-responder program. And I'm seeing here we're allocating some funds to that. Could we just talk more about our plans for that going forward, and if there's a need to, or if there's an appetite to continue to kind of build that program out more and more, and sort of how if this is the vehicle to kind of achieve that goal, or if there's some other ways we can kind of continue to make progress there, because it was really I thought that it was really cool the way that we're using that program currently. So
I'll let Interim Chief Madden address that question.
Well, as far as need, there definitely is a need, and I'm trying to get a report so I can share with you all. Whenever we take a report, we have to indicate whether or not mental health was a component of that, and that was a requirement that they wanted to put in there, but nobody can seem to figure out how to query it. So we're waiting for that query to be ran, because a significant number of our calls have a mental health component to them. So there's definitely a need. We definitely utilize the mental health co-responder quite a bit, and as well as the crisis line. So, and on top of that, all of our officers are trained in crisis intervention. So when the co-responder is not here, we are able to usually handle those situations and de-escalate those tensions. But there is a significant need for mental health resources for us, and I don't think we're alone in that. And we've seen an increase in those calls throughout this pandemic as well. So the need is there.
Well, and I think certainly that if I think as Dan has referenced, kind of being able to look at the numbers and understand those. And then I know we've talked about incorporating that as part of our, budget discussions as we move into the next year's budget and think about resources that might be allocated based on some of those needs.
Awesome, thanks.
And in concert with that, we are so fortunate to have great community policing too at the grade school level, even with Jay Fleer and police officers like that, that are hopefully futuristically preventing people from going through some of the problems that we're witnessing. That getting kids at the young age has been really helpful and supported by our police department, and we're fortunate to have them. Okay, do you want to put this on? Go ahead. Go ahead.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to point out that our nominee that represents the city of Mission at the Drug and Alcohol Council of Johnson County is actually the vice chair for the Grant Review Committee membership, and that's Leanna Reitzinger. So I just wanted to make that comment and make sure that people are aware that we do have an appointed member on DAC.
Great.
So I would recommend that we move this forward on consent.
Excellent. Is everybody okay with that? Okay, let's move on to the next item. Number 8, which is the 2021 budget ordinance. That would be Laura Smith. Go ahead, Laura.
Just the next 2 items are really things that are typically just housekeeping items for us each year. We consider an ordinance that formally adopts the budget that was presented and approved back in August of this last year. This gives us the opportunity, if there are significant changes in the budget, that we could potentially amend that and adopt different amounts. We didn't see the need to do that at this point, so we're recommending that we formally adopt the 2021 budget as was approved in August of this year to finalize the budget and provide expenditure authority. And then the second.
Sorry, I had a question, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, Laura, I was just gonna see, it seems like this might be an okay time to ask if, I'm kind of having a mental lapse for just a quick second and it'll pass and my question will come back to me. This is how it works. Yes. Okay. Do we still have employee freezes in effect for the remainder of the year? Or how does that come into play with the budget as we look at 2021? And if you have an update on that in the pipeline for us, please feel free to tell me to just wait my turn.
I can give you a more comprehensive update on that. We haven't we're kind of been moving forward with positions on a case by case basis. And so the budget that we had looked at and presented anticipated having, all of our positions filled by September of this year. Going forward, we certainly haven't hit that. I think where we have kind of the biggest freeze on positions right now is in the police department. And in some of the other instances, public works, we've hired a municipal court clerk. There's been some transition at the community center and facilities and maintenance supervisor. So some of those community service officers, some of those positions that are really critical to kind of our operations or services that we provide to others, we've moved forward, but we do still have some positions that we're holding and evaluating.
Okay. Is there anything on this item you want to go into detail on, Laura, or are we okay to move forward?
No, you have the ordinance, and then there's just the authorization for me to spend in accordance with that approved budget is the kind of the second motion or second action that we take each year. Okay. Still have the same parameters with respect to spending limits and items that need to be, brought forward to the council for approval.
Okay. Both of these items will definitely be non-consent. They're budget related and they have to go through the public and we need to vote on them at that time. Okay, number 10, the final action item in the renewals of the 2021 cereal malt beverage licenses from Audrey McClanahan.
Thank you very much. Yes, this is an item that comes through annually based on city ordinance and state statutes. Any business that wants to sell cereal malt beverages in a retail capacity needs to obtain a license and have that renewed annually. So there are 7 businesses in the packet that are up for renewal that will need to be approved at council. The applicants will also be required to pay a fee, and the licenses will only be issued after background checks and approval by Interim Police Chief Madden. That is everything for this item, unless there's any questions.
Any questions for Audrey?
Recommend consent.
Okay. Okay, next we have discussion items, and the first item for discussion is the recent public health order from the Johnson County Board of Commissioners. And Laura Smith, would you please give us an update in your report?
Well, thank you. Sorry, as I shuffle my papers around here. So on November 19th, the Johnson County Board of Commissioners, sitting as the Board of Public Health, issued Public Health Order 002-20, which went into effect at midnight on November 16th. The public health order was put in place because we were seeing surges and spikes, certainly in the number of COVID cases, and there was an effort to try and slow that spread in our county. Specifically, that order provided some additional social distancing or physical distancing and public gathering provisions, outlined exemptions to the same, and additionally affirmed Governor Kelly's executive order related to face masks. We did include in your packet a copy of that final order, along with a frequently asked questions guideline that's available on the county's website. One of the reasons for bringing some of the physical distancing and the public gathering provisions into the public health order, and then subsequently the county adopted, via this resolution, was to make violations of those things county code violations, and provide county code officers with the ability to enforce some of those provisions that had not been enforceable under some of the other public health orders. There has been since really even prior to the issuance of the order and the resolution, there's been a lot of discussion among the communities about who has responsibility for enforcement. If the county approves the orders, do the individual cities have to provide or approve standalone agreements in order for county officials to enforce within our city limit boundaries? I just received yesterday kind of I think what has been through the ringer through all of our cities. We've had a number of meetings with city managers, city administrators, city attorneys, talking about the form of that agreement, which has been substantially modified in a version that we were discussing yesterday. I did not have time to go through and get the agenda item prepared for you all for that discussion around that agreement for tonight. And so I would like to bring that forward with the revised agreement next week as we kind of wrap all of this up. But I did want to leave this on this evening to just kind of talk about and kind of provide a little bit of an update. I think what we've seen surrounding the public health orders and just a lot of these situations through the pandemic is a lot of confusion around who has responsibility for what. A lot of that has mistakenly fallen back, I think, on cities, and that's been challenging for our staff, our police officers and others sometimes to be able to navigate some of that effectively. So we'll bring that back. I will tell you that in that agreement, the county code officers are again, would only be enforcing the physical distancing and the gathering limit sizes, not mask enforcement. The mask enforcement still would fall under the purview of the district attorney, as it has for the last several months. And so that was a piece that was not brought into kind of the enforcement mechanism or under that umbrella by the county. So we'll provide some of that additional detail. There were a lot of sort of glaring holes in the first agreement that we saw, or that was presented to us as cities, in terms of it was a very broad brush, not necessarily specific just to this order. I think that I have to commend the county they really have listened and worked with the cities to draft an agreement that addresses or has addressed the majority of those concerns. And I believe they're tallying, but I just believe in the conversations that I've had since yesterday when it was redistributed, that I think we can anticipate most of the cities in the county entering into that agreement for enforcement within their jurisdictions. So we'll bring that forward. But just sort of in the general spirit of where we are with respect to some of the factors that caused the county to take this action, wanted to just sort of touch base again with you all about where we are as an organization and as an entity with some of the COVID protocols and precautions that we've put in place over the last several months. The governor's plan and phased reopening plan is sort of kind of flown out the window, where we are. But we have continued to kind of follow the matrix that we established several months ago. And I think we were conservative. I know we were conservative in our approach to our reopening strategies. I think that has served us well. I think we continue to be very cautious and conservative. We have an internal team that meets twice a week to review issues, to review what's happening with respect to cases in the county and in the metro area, what's happening within our employee population. And as you all know, we have had, as I think almost every city now in the metro has, we've had employees who have tested positive, and we've been through that process. But I think we've done a good job in protecting the public that has now been coming into our facilities, whether that be, limited traffic at City Hall or through our municipal court system. And obviously, primarily where we still are seeing the largest amount of patrons or users is at the community center. With this latest order, we did make some revisions immediately to operations at the community center. And one of those was to kind of sort of close down the locker room facilities. There was that requirement in the county's public health order if there were restroom facilities available elsewhere in the building. And because we had those restroom facilities available, and because we have lobby access to the pool area, our locker rooms have been closed since November 16th and will remain closed. We had never reached a gathering limit size or never authorized a gathering limit size with our rentals or fitness classes or anything else in the community center facility that under the Ad Astra plan, we weren't close to what we would have been allowed to have, and we are still under the gathering limit size that was established by the county's latest public health order, which is 50. And so I'll let Penn kind of speak to that a little bit more, and he's got some information and some trend data to just share with you about sort of what we've seen in terms of usage of the community center facility. At this point, I don't know that we would recommend making any modifications to our actual, most of the protocols that we have in place, with the exception, I know there have been some inquiries and we've seen some other jurisdictions looking at requiring masks at all times while in the facility. So I think that's something we would certainly want to have some additional conversation around. But with that, I'll let Penn kind of share where we are just in terms of numbers that will maybe help give you a sense and inform our conversations around, how many people we actually have using our facilities at this point.
Thanks, Laura. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Just following up on the rental capacity, we limit the use of our rooms based off of 6 by 6 square feet. So how many people can fit in that room versus total occupancy, and essentially cut in half, which are the two basic measurements for defining meeting the criteria for the health order. And in both cases, we're below the county standard, so we feel pretty confident that we're on the right track and would recommend keeping that same standard in place. In terms of the trends that, can I get the ability to share a screen, please? In terms of the trends, I've got some data for attendance at the community center since we've opened. Thank you. And so this data off to our right is based off the busiest week since we've opened the beginning of June. And you can see it's broken down by hour. We open at 5:30 and then we close at 9 p.m. We're open Monday and then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Close at midday for cleaning. Here are the total numbers of attendees per day, and this is our busiest day thus far. And you take into consideration that pre-COVID, our numbers were right around, this time of year, we're right around 700 to 850, somewhere in that range. People start ramping up post-Thanksgiving to kind of shed those pounds. But this is a chart showing how that breaks down visually. You can see our two most utilized times are 9:30 to 10:30 and 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. And then followed by the opening time. We get a lot of lap swimmers in that early hour. We see that dip pretty consistently at midday and then right before closing, which is consistent with pre-COVID as well as COVID numbers. This is our attendance trend. And so whether we're talking about pre-COVID or in the midst of COVID, this trend is pretty static. The only difference would be the peak number, but we always see Monday being the highest. It takes a dip on Tuesday. Wednesday comes in at the second highest level of attendees, and then Thursday and Friday's been our lowest attendance. And then we've been tracking, here's what we've been tracking since week 1. Over here, total attendance, week 1, total 543. I added a percent change from 1 week to the next because we're going to take a look at a chart that shows kind of how we're trending up, generally speaking, in terms of attendance since week 1 through week 25. You'll notice some of these asterisks align with certain either jumps in attendance or decreases in attendance. We had opened the basketball and weights that third week, opened the pool. We saw a pretty significant jump. Closed earlier because there's just no attendance at those times, and we closed Saturdays and we saw a pretty significant dip. Right here, we opened the parks and then school opened virtually. You could see evening hours extended. There's an addition, hot tub, held pretty static, opening, walking in the North Gym, and then another dip right around when school went back in person. And then here's where the health order meeting took place. We saw a dip that continued to dip. And then of course, this most recent week was Thanksgiving and Black Friday. And so if we look at that, what that weekly attendance looks like, we see a general trend going up, people feeling like we're doing a great job with our safety protocols, safe enough to return, at least in a limited capacity. I don't have numbers on how many of these patrons are coming consistently versus just once a week, but you can see, generally speaking, it's trending up. And I think that speaks volumes to our team, the protocols we've got placed, and obviously people who don't feel comfortable are opting out and just refusing to be at the community center. In line with that, we just held a Cyber Monday membership blitz, and we were eager to see how many people would take advantage of that opportunity. We had 30 memberships on Cyber Monday specifically, and part of that promotional was that you had to pay for an entire year's membership. So some people were willing to commit to an entire year's worth of membership, and because of that, they got a 20% discount. We wanted to show them that we valued them, and that it was worth, in the midst of COVID, applying some of their scarce resources to a membership at the community center.
That's great.
And I have a question on that peak week, November. That was also election week. Did that attendance also get reflected by the voters that attended the community center?
Potentially. I would say that most of the voters came in a separate entrance. So the attendants that we were tracking came to the entry desk, and they either scanned their card or they filled out a waiver to utilize the facility. And it is possible that some people came in, filled out a waiver, and then walked out, but they could not access the polls through the community center. So I would say it's, if there is any people that were counted in that, it's a nominal amount.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Penn, I also had a question.
Yes.
So I know I've been saying this since we reopened the community center, but I feel very strongly, at least personally, in order to continue supporting the community center's operation, that we need to have masks required at all times. I still believe that's what's required by Governor Kelly's order, that there are no exceptions or general carve-outs for athletic activity in the order. And I know before we were relying on Johnson County Parks and Rec, who's now changed their position. And for all of their sports leagues, they're now requiring masks at all times. And so I really think we need to revisit that, where rates are at now, and institute masks.
Yeah, we're certainly open to that discussion. We're hoping to get input from every council member. Obviously, this is a pretty important element to be consistent on, just citywide, and that would help us. I know we get a significant amount of feedback from individuals who, like you, are very aware of other people around them or in the facility who either have it dipped on the nose or some kind of modification. And then there are others who feel comfortable with the protocols that are in place. I would emphasize that the reason I brought up our attendance numbers, we're not at 50% capacity. We weren't at the facilities capacity, even in our busiest time of year. There's a fair amount of square footage. People have been doing a great job of spreading out their use, staying away from each other, and self-policing whenever they're in these confined areas. We've got 20 treadmills and ellipticals. I believe most of you are familiar with how it's set up in the cardio area. Over the last month and a half, I have never seen any more than 3 people in that area at any given time. And keeping in mind, we've got 4 feet in between machines. We've shut down so that you can only use every 3rd machine. And so we've really taken protocol seriously and put a lot of precautions in place so that the off chance that somebody is positive and they're around others, the risk of infection is minute.
Yeah, and I really appreciate all of that. And I do think we've been doing a great job, and the success of our ability to keep the facility open, reflects that. And I thank you and the staff. But, since we reopened the community center, there's been a lot more knowledge gained about the virus. I think both in terms of it being aerosolized and particles, staying in the air in facilities and rooms for certain periods of time. And then, like I said, organizations that we were relying on before to support not wearing masks while people were exercising have now reversed course. And so I think we should join them and be requiring masks at all times, especially because the rates that we have now are greater than when we were keeping the community center shut completely. And it looks like in the chat, Hillary had a comment too.
Hold on, you bring up the rates are higher now than when we were keeping it shut down completely, but do you have any evidence, or has there been anything to show that any of that has to do with the community center? I mean, we've seen spikes all over the place, and even in they've had strict lockdowns, there have been spikes. So
yeah, no, I'm not saying that it's.
I want to be really careful about the language we're using, because I think our staff has really done a great job in taking a lot of measures to try to keep things protected. So
yeah, no, and I'm not trying to imply at all that it's been a cause of outbreak or anything. I'm just saying that overall community-wide, not community center, community-wide spread is the highest we're seeing. And so I think, taking any reasonable precautions we can to keep the community center operating makes sense to me.
Okay.
Debbie, I have a comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with Solly. I would like to see us require masks at all times in the community center. For me personally, it's a reason why I don't go, and I don't think I'm alone in mission. And I would, like you, Penn, be curious how other council members feel about that, because I think it's something that we should act on sooner rather than later.
well, I would completely disagree, at least for the purposes of working out. I mean, if you're on the fitness equipment, I think requiring somebody to wear a mask in that case is completely just overboard. And if we're that concerned about it and we want to take that kind of approach, I honestly would be much more in favor of just shutting the whole thing down. I think it's kind of pointless, and I'm not in favor of shutting it down. But if we're going to require that a mask has to be worn while you're on a treadmill, it seems ridiculous to me. And I would just say, if we really want to get that strict about it, let's just shut the whole place down and really not worry about it at all. I don't like that option, but I think doing that is a lot better than the halfway thing of trying to make sure everyone has a mask on all the time while they're working out.
So this is Audrey, can I?
Sure.
Okay, so I actually go and work out. I try to go every day, but I go there many times a week. And I do see that most people who are on the machines keep their masks on, but for some of those who take them off, I could not imagine asking them to, because it just seems like they breathe better without it and they're enjoying themselves. And I think that if we are going to require someone, I just think that requiring someone to wear a mask while on a treadmill but not seated at a table is just, it's kind of ridiculous. And for those who are, and I completely respect anyone who doesn't want to go into an establishment because of exposure or whatever the case may be, but is somebody going around the building and asking people to cover their whole face or whatever the case may be, I don't feel like that's going to have that much of an impact, because we're still having people go through all of the other precautions and wearing the masks anytime you even leave your equipment. So
Okay. Solly, did you have another question or comment?
Yeah, I just had a clarification. So one difference from example, a restaurant to me is, again, the governor's order, because the governor's order does not allow for the type of carve out that we've been doing. But the governor's order does, for now at least, allow, sit down restaurants to operate. And so I think we should be consistent with the order and with what Johnson County is now doing for their own parks programs.
Go
So
ahead,
from a
Art.
practical standpoint, I think what RC's saying is it's kind of ridiculous to say that you could sit there in a bar for 2 hours and drink a beer and not have a mask on, but if you want to go run on the treadmill for 30 minutes, you have to, right? That just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me either. I'm just saying if we're going to really push that hard to require a mask all the time while somebody's using fitness equipment, then let's shut the whole place down. Because if we're really that worried about the risk, then let's shut it all down. If it's that important. I don't think that we should get to that point. My vote would not be to do that. But the halfway stuff and the halfway approaches that have been taken at multiple levels of government with this just don't work. So either let's do it all the way and shut it down, or let's keep things rolling. We haven't had problems, and staff has done a great job of adjusting and trying to spread things out. And, you know, to Penn's point, we haven't been over 50% capacity or higher. I think we've been able to space things out, and I don't know of any issues that we've had at the community center. I think they've done a great job over there. But if you're that concerned about it, let's hold a vote on shutting the whole thing down. That's where I'm at.
And can I ask you a question? Do we have an option of people doing a self temperature take before they enter the building? Is that an option?
It's not currently an option. We asked them 3 questions based off of, you know, who they've been around, how they're currently feeling, and whether they've tested positive.
Mm-hmm. But you know, getting a test is a one shot in time. You can go take a test and be negative, and 2 hours later go somewhere and be exposed, and you're not negative anymore. That's a misnomer with the testing, which I find concerning. Mm-hmm. There has to be an exposure route, and the test is a one shot in time. Do we have another way possibly to kind of adhere to both sides of the spectrum here, to have, if you've got a temperature, you need to not go in? Would that not be one criteria to look at to limit potential exposure?
I think that's a reasonable criteria. We've seen it implemented in other facilities, not just community centers, but restaurants, certain stores. Yeah, so.
Sure.
Debbie?
Yes, go ahead, Trent.
Thanks. So I guess just a couple of thoughts on this, since we're kind of all talking about it. You know, the CDC came out today and said that this is the worst public health crisis ever in the country's history now through this winter. And, you know, it's entirely probable that, you know, any one of, you know, when you have 300 people entering the building every day, at least, that some of them are going to be COVID positive just based on what's going on across the county. And if Planet Fitness is requiring masks at all times when you're working out there, the fact that, you know, we've received commentary from the public, you know, kind of expressing displeasure, or at least just like concern that not all are wearing masks. I think it makes sense from a public health perspective. It's not certainly ideal. I mean, I don't think anyone wants to go and work out in a mask, but if it allows the Venn diagram to be in the middle, where you maintain the physiological and emotional benefits of working out while doing everything that the CDC is saying to also prohibit, you know, a pandemic, or at least to protect yourself as best you can from a pandemic, I think that in itself is common ground and allows one to still try to do what they want to do while taking every effort that they can to be safe. It's invisible. It's not like anybody can look and walk through hallways and not know that, you know, if you're not wearing a mask, that it's fine. But, you know, that doesn't mean you're living in fear. It doesn't mean that you're, you know, putting some kind of draconian measure in. You're doing something to follow guidance and public health. And I think it allows us to continue to perform at a high level like we have been up until now. And that's just my thought. And I will let it go from there.
Debbie, I have another comment if I can. I agree with everything Trent just said. But I do want to add that I think the difference between a restaurant and a community center is that we can't control what restaurants are doing. You know, that's what the county is for, but we can control what we're doing within our own community center. And so, you know, I really would like to see, you know, Solly recommended or suggested that we may be out of line with what we should be doing. So I'd really like to see staff further explore her suggestion of that. And if that's true, then I think we don't even really need to have an opinion on this. If it's not accurate, then I think, you know, further digging into this next week is something I would like to see.
Ron? do you have a
Madam Chair?
Go ahead, Ken. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, my question is to Penn. Have you looked at other community centers in Johnson County and what their policies are in terms of mask usage or requirements?
Yes, so Johnson County Parks and Recreation has come out the strongest, most consistent. The only other was Overland Park requiring masks exclusively on the walking track at all times. So they haven't amended any of their fitness or weight room mask wearing. And I've heard Leaf Summit is doing a similar thing, requiring a mask in all areas except aquatics.
What has been?
Debbie?
Go ahead, Ken. Go ahead.
What has been the reaction from your patrons in terms of this issue? Have you had a lot of conflict?
When we discuss the potential of requiring masks, we've had more conflict than we've had in the past. So a lot of people are asking if that's driven just as a question mark, if that's driven by the health order, or if that's driven by an outbreak specifically within our community, and we're just trying to self-correct for that. And so we've had some conversations to try to mitigate those fears. But yeah, I think outside of that, the patrons who don't feel comfortable have opted out of use, and the ones that are here are the ones that are healthy. And I think generally people are honestly answer those questions. They know that we're consistently asking them, and they don't come when they feel sick.
I guess my other question is with regards to staff's role in policing this, what discussions have you had among the staff themselves in terms of being put in that position?
Yeah, that's a great question, Councilmember Davis. There's a fair amount of anxiety being placed in a situation where they've got to continually circulate the facility to ensure that anybody, as soon as we turn our back, hasn't just pulled down the mask, right? Knowing that we're just around the corner, lifting it up and just kind of circumventing the mask at all time order. So we've had a lot of heated discussions internally, and the big fear is that we're placing our part-time team, who's not as equipped as full-timers to deal with conflict, in a situation where they've got to then kick out patrons who are being a little bit obstinate, or calling on Chief Madden and his team to kind of help back us up in this decision. So.
Okay, Solly.
Yeah, I did just want to make one small clarification on something that you said, Penn. You said the people who are at our facility are healthy, and I think there's a distinction between people who feel healthy and people who are healthy. And I was talking about the things that we've learned over the course of the pandemic, and the scientists are now saying that nearly 50% of all cases are caused by asymptomatic spread. So it's either people before they're showing symptoms but are already contagious, or people who have full-blown COVID, but just their own symptoms are super mild, but they're still contagious. So I don't think we can say just because people believe themselves to be honestly answering the questionnaire that if they're in the facility, they're healthy.
Okay, it's obvious that we have strong opinions on both sides, so we need to come to some kind of a conclusion on this topic. So how about a straw vote on whether or not where the consensus lies? And if there's no consensus, I guess we'll have to continue debating it. But what do you think, Chairman?
I agree. I think we ought to just do a brief straw poll and then move forward, and we can continue further discussion. So Audrey, do you want to frame it so that, I don't know, what do you think, Mayor? It's up to you.
Well, I would say either we keep the current rules in place or we add the additional step of masks. Because right now, masks are worn at all times unless you're in your immediate, on a piece of equipment, right? Is there any other time the mask get taken off other than on the equipment or?
Yeah, so you can be, as a rental group, you could have food as part of your birthday party and have the mask off in your specific area.
Okay.
Or on the track or in fitness classes, right, Penn?
Correct. Yeah, any kind of rigorous activity. So racquetball, yeah.
So the question is, to keep the current rules or do we adopt additional step of mask at all times? I guess that's the way I see
Well,
it.
what about option 3 of closing it back down?
I would.
I'm going to jump in there, and I
even bring that subject up.
I mean, with all due respect, I mean, I
Hold on.
understand.
I think if you're going to require masks, I think that's just getting to the point where it's so absurd. And anybody that's going to really go to work out there, I mean, sure, you might still have some rental business, some non-fitness people that go in there, but they're going to be wearing masks for the most part anyway. But the people that are using it to work out, I mean, to wear a mask and require that, like, why even stay open at that point? Why even have anything operational? It seems crazy to me.
I think we might be surprised by what we would see there. And I think that depending on the consensus of the council, if you wanted to amend the current requirements, I think we would see very quickly. I mean, we're tracking usage and attendance every single day. I think we would, if it's going to cause a dramatic decline, I think we'll be able to document that. And then I think that is the appropriate time to say, is it cost effective to keep the doors open and the lights on?
Maybe I'm not getting my point. What's the point of all this? If we're really that concerned about how this thing is spreading, then why not just shut down?
Well, can I make a comment?
Go ahead, Ken.
I think that what we're saying is that there's a consistency with the policy of the city with regards to other facilities that we operate. And in this situation, it is a preventive measure. And we certainly don't want to see loss of activity in terms of the community center, but we also may be having individuals that are not participating because there's no mask policy at the community center. So I think you can see it on both sides. Your measure of attendance may be affected by the fact that they don't feel comfortable and don't want to participate in that environment. So personally, I would say that from the standpoint of this current environment with regards to the increased community spread and the possible exposure, that I think we should take a safer approach to this and go ahead and require mask usage throughout. I think that if you have a meeting where there's food involved, obviously you can't enforce that, but I think that it can be enforced with regards to the exercise program. So I would be in favor of increasing the standard to include mask usage.
Pam, can I ask one clarification point? When you're on a bicycle, how far away are you from the next piece of equipment?
Right now, you're 8 feet or more.
That's fine. Thanks. You answered my question. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Should we just go ahead and do a straw poll? Laura, do you have another recommendation or do you want to move forward?
No, I think let's do the straw poll, but I think I would say, just for ease of everybody knowing what they're voting for, we say maintain the status quo or require masks at all times. So I think if you say maintain, let's vote on, let's make the question require masks at all times. And then everybody's crystal clear on, what they're voting.
So all times, including if you're having a meeting there where you've got food and drinks, or not?
Okay, so all time. No, I know.
If you're
All time. So
and working out 8 feet apart from someone else, like, am I the only one that sees the absurdity of this? Really? I don't know. I don't hear anyone else speaking up for it. Maybe I'm just that out of the loop on what's been going on, but if we're
Let's
really,
just go ahead and do the straw poll.
then
Okay, so I'll start off the straw poll. As a person who goes there and works out, I'm very comfortable with the space that's between the machines and the people. And I've seen people, most of them don't even take their masks off, but the ones who do really struggle, and you know that they want to be there and they're really working to be there. And I am not for implementing masks all the time.
Okay. Audrey, can you just do a straw poll?
Sure.
Leave things like they are, start with that, and then we'll go to the full mask requirement.
Okay, so we'll do yes or no on mask at all time. Is that?
No, it was the other way around. but-
Let's maintain this. Let's say maintain the status quo. So
Right.
Okay. All right. Bolting House.
So a yes vote is maintain status quo.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, I vote no.
Okay. Thomas.
Sorry, no.
Schlosmacher.
yes.
Rothrock.
Yes.
Inman.
Yes.
Crane.
Aye.
Davis.
No.
And Flora.
No.
Looks like we have a tie.
Is
Mayor.
the mayor gonna break the tie?
I don't vote at committee meetings, so.
Right.
Question real quick, is there like a compromise option where, we could require masks on the track perhaps, or, in like an additional highly trafficked area, and, that could be something to build on for now?
Let's do this. I would recommend this, since we're going to bring back the agreement with the county next week at that committee meeting. Let us kind of go back and process what we've heard tonight and see if we can't propose something, because I know we've got still a whole nother agenda to get to.
Right. This is ridiculous.
It is. Okay.
Laura, quick question or comment. If next week prior to the meeting, if we could maybe have legal or you or someone take another look at our interpretation based on now current mandates and see if we still feel confident about the interpretation we've taken on, or if we feel like it's was potentially misinterpreted.
Okay, so we'll revisit this issue next Wednesday. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Let's move to our last discussion item, please. Last discussion item is the Shawnee Mission School District bond issue for the rebuild of Rushton Elementary, and that is Mayor Appletoft.
All right. Just a high level overview. It was either earlier this year or late last year when the Shawnee Mission School District started signaling that they wanted to put out a bond issue, and part of that bond issue was rebuild of some elementary schools. And so they sponsored an open house at North. We went and I went, and I know several council members were there, had an opportunity to talk to our board member representative from North, and also talk to the, I believe the architect, and the school district was there. And at that time, there were 3 schools that were being considered for the bond issue, with Rushton being one of them, which was great news. There was also talk about maybe going to a bigger bond issue and including more schools. Well, fast forward to now, the latest proposal is five. I'm going to concentrate on the elementary schools. There are 5 elementary schools that are being proposed to be rebuilt. Now, the big thing to keep our focus on is the bond issue has to pass for this to even be a point of debate. And so our focus right now should really be on what can we do to help with the bond issue. Now, the school district, now with the 5 elementary schools, Rushton was still one of the 5, and it was planned, the current plan is that it would be started in June of 23, with 2 schools going in June of 21, and the second school would be, or third school would be December of 21, and then 2 schools in June of 23, with Rushton being one of them. And obviously that kind of took me by surprise. How did they come to that rationale? So I communicated with 2 board members on the school board. I've also talked to Dr. Fulton 2 times on the phone and by email to find out what was the rationale and why are we going the route we're going. I think the great news is that Russian is due to be rebuilt if we can get this bond issue passed. If we can't get the bond issue passed, there'll be no rebuilds. And so I think that's the main focus we should have. I did ask Dr. Fulton if the schedule was pretty much set since the bond issue hadn't passed yet. And he said, for the most part, it had been set and there was a rationale for it. Initially, Rushton, it was thought that you could build with the existing building there, build a new building next to it. And it is possible. It's not the most ideal situation because you have to build around Rushton and you're not going to get as good of a building, as efficient of a building, having to force it on that land. Now, one of the first schools is to be proposed is Westwood View, which the school district bought land near Westwood View with the eye towards to rebuilding schools. And so that makes the most sense as far as easy land to build a new school. And then you could use Westwood View as one of those transitionary schools where your kids would go while your school is being worked on. The options, I said, well, what would happen if we had Rushton go first? And he said that the Rushton kids would need to be bused out to the Indian Creek Technology Center at 103rd Street. And so that's one disadvantage. Do we want our kids to have 2 hours, almost 2 hours, I guess, additional drive transportation time in their day? So I have talked to Dr. Fulton. I've talked to the deputy superintendent who was in charge of facilities. And I've asked them if they would entertain coming to one of our meetings. And Dr. Fulton, the deputy superintendent in charge of facilities, and I believe they're going to bring David Smith, which is their communication person, will attend our meeting next week. I told them we put them first on the agenda to tell us, about the rationale behind why they're proposing the route they are. And so I think that will be a good thing to hear from Dr. Fulton and his crew about why they made the decisions they made. Now, back to the bond issue, which I think is the primary focus. The school districts cannot advocate for the bond issue. They can only inform about that. They can only be educational about the bond issue. And that same rule applies, I believe, to the city of Mission. So the city of Mission cannot advocate, we can inform. So what the school district has done traditionally is in 1985, I believe, they have established the Committee for Excellence, which is, I guess, that advocacy group that does the promotion of the bond issue and trying to get information out. And so I talked to the chairman of that committee. His name is Brent Fuson, and he was also on that committee on past bond issues. And he felt that they had a pretty good, he called it a playbook for getting these bond issues passed. However, the problem is COVID has wreaked havoc with that playbook because their playbook was to get out and do speaking engagements. They would just go to anybody, every group who wanted to hear about it, they would go out and they would take a board member, the superintendent, and then a member of that committee, with the first 2 people giving information about the bond issue and the last person, the advocacy arm of this. So I did talk to Brent, and they haven't even got their website up. It's kind of short notice. Usually they had 9 months prep time for the last bond issue, and this time they're not going to have anywhere near that time. And so that committee is scrambling, and I know their website's not even up yet. So what they do is they raise money for the literature and for yard signs. And they've already started making fundraising calls, and they're having obviously trouble raising as much money as the last time. And so I just wanted to let you guys know where we were at, try to give you as much information as I had, invite Dr. Fulton in to give us his version from his mouth, and then see, obviously we're excited about this rebuild of Russian. I think it would be great for our city, and then see under these COVID conditions, how is this committee going to promote the bond issue And then, and how do we as a city, not being able to promote it as an entity, but then I'm assuming individuals can in their own capacity do that. So that's kind of my update. So I'll be glad to answer any questions if you have any.
Ron, can you just share with us what the 5 schools are?
It is, yeah, it's Westwood View and trying to give it to you in order. Westwood View and so Westwood View and Deemer would be the June of 21 if this bond issue passes. And then 6 months later, Pawnee. And then in June of 2023 would be Tomahawk and Rushton. So Westwood View is in Westwood, obviously. We have Rushton and the other 3 are in Overland Park.
Thank you.
Thanks for the update.
That's great.
You're welcome.
Okay, any more questions for Ron? Any more comments on the issue? Okay, let's move to our department updates. Laura, do you have any department updates for this committee?
No, I'll hold that till a few at the end of next meeting and most next week.
One quick comment before we leave the entire meeting and before we clock out. Trent mentioned on the last issue compromise. Could we find out in concert with the current rules, the current county issues, could we find out about potentially setting up a temperature requirement at the door at the entrance of the community center prior to going in? That would compromise. If someone's got a temperature, they're not coming in. I mean, is that even an option for us, Penn?
Absolutely. And I feel like that's a realistic option and easily implementable.
Excellent. Okay, so next week we can focus on what potential compromises there are, as well as what the current standards help us to make sure everybody's safe by still working with everybody's rights and respecting everybody's, current situation. Okay, it is now 8:48. And with no further discussion, that concludes the meeting of the Finance and Administration Committee. Again, this video will be made public on our website at missionks.org. Thank you. And can we have a 5-minute break before the next meeting, please?
Sounds good. So that would put us at 8:53 to start our CDC meeting.
Perfect. Thank you.
So please, everybody, mute yourselves if you can. Word to the wise. And video is probably off too.
All right, as people come back, if you put your video back on, then I'll know you're back. And or you can announce yourself.
I'm here.
I feel like I get to see you guys more than I do my own family.
That's a sad state of affairs.
Indeed.
I don't know. You all seem pretty great.
I thought we were family, Penn.
That's what I mean. That's what I mean.
Yeah, nice recovery. As my husband would say, stop digging.
Hey man, if you
Alright.
don't want to golf together next year, you just say so. Sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sally.
I was just seeing if we had all our council members back. Nick, are you back? Or Kristen, are you back?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Looks like maybe just waiting on Nick. Give him another minute. What do people think? Should we go ahead and get started? Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. I think we've got everyone else back. It is Wednesday, December 2nd at 8:55 p.m. I'd like to call this meeting of the Community Development Committee to order. In consideration of the COVID-19 social distancing recommendations, this meeting is being held via Zoom. The public is invited to participate and will be allowed to make comments through the online chat feature. Please note that your comments are visible to the group. If you wish to make a public comment, please state your name and city of residence for the record and try to be conscientious of others speaking. The meeting will be recorded and posted on the city's website, missionks.org. If you have any questions, you can contact the administrative offices at 913-676-8350. Public comments. This is the opportunity for members of the public to make a comment on anything not on our agenda tonight. And I don't see anything in the chat or any raised hands, so we will move on to public presentations, which are informational only. We do have one public presentation tonight, which is the replat of Mission Mart lots 2, 3, and 4 from our city planner, Ms. Service.
Thank you. Can you see that? Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. So the subject property is 5399 Martway Street. It's the site of the former Mission Bowl bowling alley, which was damaged by the fire in 2015. The owner of the property is Ridgeview North Associates, who also owns the Mission Mart shopping center across the street. They have a contract pending to sell lot 6 of the proposed Mission Mart plat to Mission Bowl LLC. As you recall, earlier this year, Mission Bowl LLC submitted a preliminary development plan application to the city for construction of an apartment building on lot 6 of the proposed plat shown here. The Planning Commission and City Council approved the preliminary development plan with conditions at their meeting on August 24th and September 16th, respectively. And at this time, the owner of the property is requesting approval of the replat of the property to allow the legal transfer of ownership of lot 6 of the proposed plat to Mission Bowl LLC. If the apartment project moves into the final development phase, there will be revisions to the easements in accordance with the conditions of the preliminary development plan. But for now, we're considering the application that's in front of us today, which proposes to
replat lots 2 and 3 of the original Mission Mart plat. And those 3 lots would turn into the 2 lots shown on the proposed replat. Both the current and possible future apartment use of the site are in conformance with city code. Under the new lot lines shown here, staff recommended to the Planning Commission that they approve the plat, case number 2007. And the Planning Commission did vote 8-0 at their November 23rd meeting to approve the plat with the condition that the final plat is stamped and signed by a licensed surveyor. So at the City Council meeting on December 16th, the City Council has the option for being the final approval of the plat.
All right. Any other comments or questions for Caitlin?
Recommend we take it to council consent.
This is just a discussion or a presentation, correct? Right?
This will actually be under the Planning Commission action items.
Oh,
Yep.
that's action item.
Yep.
Never mind. Thank you.
All right. No questions for Caitlin? Then we'll go ahead and move on. Thank you, Caitlin. We'll move on to our action items. Our first action item tonight is acceptance of the Community Development Committee meeting minutes from Audrey McClanahan.
Thank you. Yes, tonight this is presented the November 4th, 2020 Community Development Committee meeting minutes for your review and acceptance. Thank you.
All right, everyone good with the minutes?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to our next action item, which is the stormwater repairs for some runoff issues in Apollo Gardens. Brent Morton, can you please give us an update on this?
Brent, are you muted?
Did we lose Brent?
I apologize about that. Thank you very much. Thanks, Solly. This is in regards to Apollo Gardens, kind of a small stormwater issue we were having over there. We were notified in September 2020 by someone on the board in Apollo Gardens of one of their residents that lives in one of the units having some stormwater issues with water jumping the lower curb, lazy back curb, I like to call it, kind of the curb you'd see in front of a driveway, and jumping over the sidewalk and hitting their basement and leaking into it eventually. Issue's been going on for a while. We just found out about it in September. They've got some new board members over there. They're really trying to help the residents out with some of these major problems they've been running into as part of their dues they're paying, the way I understand it. At that point, they had sandbags stacked along the sidewalk, trying to keep the water out from jumping the curb. We went out there and investigated it. Found out there's not a lot of inlets or storm boxes in that area. Probably the closest one's 400 or 500 feet away. So if you start trying to chase that storm water and get it underground, it can get real expensive real quick. Worked with the one board member I was dealing with and the homeowner to come up with a plan. They also had an engineer out there on site on their side doing some stuff to the house itself to fix waterproof the basement again. And everybody was in concurrence that adding the additional high back curb and the sketch that or drawing that's attached in your packet would really solve the problem. Also with what they did with the small retaining wall in front of the house and did a little more grading and upsize some of their stormwater pipe that is on their property to address this water issue. They were real happy with it. It's also been to their board and just as a drawing or sketch so they could look over it and didn't have any issues. So everybody's real excited about it. I think we're doing the right thing, helping out the homeowner. You know, it's a street with no stormwater on it right now. So the water, the quicker you get it under the ground or out of the way, it's better for everybody. So, I mean, I would say in a future project, 10 years from now, if we were in there, we'd be adding stormwater anyways, but this is a relatively cheap fix that we can get by and keep water out of somebody's residence or basement. We took it out to bid to 3 contractors. The lowest qualified bid was Phoenix Concrete. We've used them on a few projects in the past. on some of our safe routes to school projects with the sidewalk running behind the schools over there on Cedar, I believe. They did that project for us, so had good luck with that contractor, and they also came in as a low bid, asking for approval for Phoenix Concrete for $11,251.93 to complete this project. I know February seems like a ways off, but when you're getting into winter and concrete work and, you know, a small project like this with a bigger contractor, it could be sooner or it could be later. So just kind of shooting for a far out date, but I'll push on them and try to get it done as soon as possible if it gets approved tonight. But I think with our on-call engineering service, Olson, who helped me out with this, me and Celia, we came up with the best and most cost-effective solution for the time being. Should last as long as we need to until we're back over there working in that area more extensively with a street project or something to that extent. So I'd be happy to answer any questions or any thoughts.
And just a point of just a point of clarification. So if tonight it would just get advanced to the December 16th council agenda. So you wouldn't have formal council action on this for another 2 weeks.
Okay.
I have a question, Brent.
Yeah, Ken?
On the aerial view, can you identify which house is affected?
So are you looking at the drawing that was in your packet?
I'm looking at the picture. There's an aerial view.
Yes.
Is it the one on the right? Is it the house on the right?
So if you see that white car in that parking spot, it's the first unit to the right with that landscaping bed in front of it.
It's the house that the car is facing, or it's the house to the right of that?
It's the house the car is facing. Where that red line is, that new curb, it jumps that curb and goes straight towards that house.
Okay, thank you.
So there's no stormwater on that hill. So the water comes rushing down the curb and hits that 90 bend, and it's lazy back curb and jumps over and heads towards his house.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Any other questions, or I'd entertain a recommendation?
Recommend taking to council and with consent.
Everyone good with that? All right, we'll move on then to our fourth action item, which is the contract for the 2021 Street Preservation Program Engineering Services. Celia Duran.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council members. Although 2021 and 2022 Street Preservation Engineering Services contracts are two separate items, I'm going to go ahead and talk about both items under this discussion since they're obviously related. So over the last several months, staff and city council have had a number of work sessions regarding the development of a proposed street preservation program. Using pavement condition and geotechnical data, staff and Stantec, our pavement consultant, have developed proposed street treatments, estimated costs for each street, and timeframes for completion of these street projects based on the data. So at our last work session, we talked about that the city currently has about $1.1 million in the street fund that we talked about designating for residential street preservation projects. And this cost would cover design, inspection, construction, contingency, and inflation. So we're recommending proceeding with this work so we can begin making progress on maintenance of our residential streets. So the street projects proposed for 2021 and listed in your packet were selected with the intent that we can get them designed and bid by early 2021 with construction completed by the end of the summer. And in order to meet the time frame, we selected residential streets with the lowest PCIs or pavement condition indexes that were eligible for a UBAS treatment, since that requires less design than a full depth replacement or a mill and overlay. And you'll note in the packet that 60th Street from Roe to Shawnee Mission Parkway was a UBAS treatment originally, but there's a lot of cracking, and I talked to Brent about that. He said that there's been a number of water main breaks along this stretch over the last 5 years. So we think that's kind of what happened. So when we took the data back in 2017, it wasn't so bad, but we're recommending proceeding with this project with a mill and overlay and base repair. The cost for design for these streets is $27,986 and would be completed by Olson, one of our on-call engineering firms. So we're also recommending completing design for proposed 2022 street projects this year so that we can go ahead and identify stormwater repairs and submit those projects to the county for funding. We need to submit those in May for funding in 2022. And we would also then have the opportunity to have projects ready to go at the first of the year or as soon as we had a sales tax passed, hopefully cross your fingers, and take advantage of early bidding for more favorable bids. So construction of these projects are contingent upon renewal of the street sales tax, which expires in March 2022. So the proposed 2022 projects were selected, going down the list, starting from the lowest to the highest PCIs, and they require full depth asphalt reconstruction due to lack of asphalt thickness and pavement condition. The cost for these projects is $249,760. There is a higher cost for designing full depth reconstruction projects since this requires a more detailed survey, more utility coordination, and that is based on a $2 million budget for streets in 2022, whereas the design and the construction of projects for 2021 were based on the $1.1 million. We prepared preliminary construction estimates for each of the projects, but we'll get into more details and better refining the costs during the design, and our street projects will bid accordingly. So some of the projects may be bid as bid alternates and then constructed depending on how the bids come in, or we can move them to the next year for construction. Staff recommends approval of engineering design contracts with Olson for these projects, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Celia. Any comments or questions for Celia?
Thanks for your work on this, Celia. I really appreciate it. And I would go ahead and recommend both items for consent.
All right. Hillary, do you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Celia, for your work on this. I just had a quick question about funding. So we don't have funding identified for 2022 projects. Hopefully we will with the tax renewal, of course. But so, about $300,000 for, bidding, et cetera, design, yada, yada, of the 1.1. And so are we expecting that the 2021 projects are going, a kind of a general idea of cost will fall within that $700,000 to $800,000 range? Is that, in your opinion, makes sense?
Yes. I had Olson go ahead and do a preliminary cost estimate. And so to the best of our ability, yes, we think we should be able to get those projects done in 2021.
And then for 2022, Celia, we would always have the option to add projects if we took measures to increase our funding source through a bond or something. We could do that, right?
Correct. I have some projects identified for, just preliminarily identified. And so we could, look at stormwater, make sure that we're taking advantage of stormwater funds from the county, and then, pick some projects that we still are in those ranges of low PCIs, but that we could, get done, obviously depending on when and if we get the sales tax approved, the earlier the better we can, get going on it.
Great. Trent, did you have a question?
No, just a quick comment. It's exciting. Nice to kind of have some things on paper, especially the 2022 projects for neighbors and everything. So thank you for your team and the work you guys been doing.
Thank you.
Sully, I do have a question. This
yes,
is
Kristen.
I noticed that 54th Street, which has been in bad shape for a number of years, they've got Water One in there now doing a number of street, their infrastructure issues. Is there any way we could piggyback on that since they're tearing up the street anyway? Would there be some economies of scale with that? Thank you.
Which street did you say? Did you say 54th Street?
Yes, 54th Street between Dearborn and Horton.
I can speak on that a little bit too, Celia.
Pardon me?
I can speak on that a little bit too, Celia.
Okay, well, first, I just wanted to say, before you, and then go ahead, Brent, but I wanted to say that our plan is if we get, this annual funding, is that we immediately start working with Water One on that. And so we coordinate, and they already ask us for projects, so we would coordinate projects with them. So they would go in the year before, do their water main relocation, and then we would come in next year and do the street. And so that would save them, and that would also save us. They would just do their temporary repairs, and then we'd come in and make it look good, as opposed to maybe they only fix their side that they tore up. So that is the that's the plan in the future. I'd have to look at 54th Street and see where we are and whether we could, accommodate that. But that's definitely what we want to start doing. We don't want to do, a brand new pavement and then have somebody come in and tear it up. So that's, that's our intention, is to coordinate with everybody so it works well for all entities. Okay, Brent, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, the only thing I was going to add to that is Water One's doing a lot of main replacements right now in our Mission, Kansas area. And I've talked to them before. They use Superior Bowens, their on-call contractor right now, for all their patchwork or main replacement work. And their price is already negotiated for like the next 3 years in their contract. And it's for small, big patches and all that kind of stuff. So I've talked to them before when they were doing like center line road replacement, since they're just doing half the road. And the cost isn't always cheaper than if we went out and bid the project with the street program or something bigger, because the economy to scale is not always there on the contract they have with Superior Bowen, because it's got so much small and tedious work. So sometimes that cost increases from what we could do if we just went out and bid it ourselves.
This is slightly off topic, but do we know if Water One, if that's what all the equipment that's sitting inside of Millhaven for the past 2 weeks is?
Yes.
Okay, and the patch on Lamar that's not very good, is that also them?
We're out on Lamar.
Yeah, that
65th, that was a sand pit for like 3 weeks, and then they patched it and it's kind of already indented.
So that's just cold patch, temporary
Okay.
patch. So it's still waiting for temperatures to get right, and they will come back and permanently patch that. I can check on that tomorrow, Solly, but that is not the permanent fix right now.
Okay, great.
And I did just want to add that we are planning to come back at a work session in January with kind of the broader look at kind of at least our staff recommendations and options for getting funding aligned and advancing those conversations as well.
All right, any other questions? I think Ken had made a recommendation for consent on both items. Anyone have any objection to that? Are we all good? All right, so that takes care of items 4 and 5. We're now on to our last action item, which is consideration for completion of the conceptual design process for Broadmoor, Waterworks, Streamway, and Anderson Parks with Penalmany.
Thanks, Councilmember Flora. So you may recall back in November 2019, Mission contracted with Confluence through a competitive RFQ process to redesign Mohawk Park, which included a site analysis as well as restroom design, pavilion, court, trails, and some play features and improved parking. They also facilitated meetings with stakeholder committee, neighborhood input meetings, as well as 2 staff meetings and Parks, Recreation, and Tree Commission meetings. And that total cost was $30,000. So the initial investment in the Mohawk Park project allowed Mission staff to finalize a model of public engagement that we could then reproduce at a lower cost for subsequent parks. And we feel we've got that model in place that mirrors most of those deliverables, but at a fraction of the cost. So the next step in implementation is bringing the planning process down to each specific park. This gives us an opportunity to look at some of the amenities over a longer term horizon, so that the location of or addition of improvements in the early years doesn't limit what we can do in long-term vision. So staff has shown through the Mohawk Park conceptual redesign process that we've got a system that works well. It gives the opportunity for public engagement and surrounding neighbors to feel heard, and allows them to influence some of the decisions in that conceptual design. So as part of that process, we're continuing that element. And the next phase then is to create a stakeholder committee for each of the parks. That involves a ward-specific council member, 2 Parks and Recreation Tree Commission members. We'd like to have at least 2 park neighbors, and then any appropriate stakeholders that utilize the park consistently, with special consideration given to having a representative cross sample of various demographics that utilize the park, with the objective being a community of all ages, something that we can focus on and feel like we're giving due diligence to. The design firm plays a pretty crucial role in most of the design elements. They confer with us. They obviously reference the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. They confirm programming and event elements are consistent now with what they were back in the original master planning. Take photos, review existing utilities, and then produce some hand-rendered concepts. All of the stakeholder committee meetings are then hosted by Parks and Recreation staff. So we're saving all of that cost. We facilitated things like use patterns on trails, other amenities, priorities for various stakeholder groups, maintenance standards and costs, which weren't initially included, but we feel like we've got a better handle on that, cost and location of amenities, as well as lighting and ADA issues and the potential impacts surrounding each of the neighborhoods. The consultants will then, after that initial stakeholder meeting, review the minutes that we create, confer with staff again, develop a rough order of magnitude cost, and then adjust any of those concepts. So we feel like it's really a three-legged stool. We get the stakeholder steering committee, we get the Parks Recreation Tree Commission, as well as internal Parks and Recreation staff, and then neighborhood input completes that third leg to give us a really strong vision and allow any corrective changes to be implemented. And then the last step is illustrative plans, couple perspective and supporting graphics, and then a final order of magnitude cost estimates. That allows us to then create a budget, CIP requests, and then pursue potential grants, which obviously help offset the cost to the City of Mission. This also allows us uniquely to kind of communicate some of our long-range plans with landowners, like Water One, like KDOT, as well as residents and visitors, since we've got a special use sales tax. Having these conceptual designs available and accessible to reference them gives us an opportunity to kind of meet all of those moving elements. So the next 4 parks is Broadmoor Park. It comes in at $9,500. Waterworks Park, $8,750. Anderson is roughly $8,750, and Streamway Park, $8,750. And these are primarily broken down by acreage, site analysis. The concepts is where a lot of the costs kind of vary. Then the review meetings with staff, as well as the final plan and estimates, which brings the total cost to what was it? I lost the number. $35,750. Man, couldn't find it so late. So staff recommends the approval of a contract with Confluence for the conceptual design for the deliverable of 4 parks to be completed over the next, and we had initially discussed a 6-month time period, kind of committed to you as a council. We wanted to move relatively quickly in delivering kind of a vision some of this Parks and Recreation master plan. We realize COVID has put a dent in a lot of that. We feel it's effective to kind of get feedback firsthand and in person from our constituents, from our residents, and from each of you. And so we feel it appropriate to kind of extend that timeline, if it's appropriate to you, to maybe the next 9 months, potentially a little bit longer, but ultimately generate some conceptual final plans, which will help us create budget discussion and then set the path to realize park improvement goals in a realistic time frame. The funding source for all of this would be from outdoor park improvements identified in the Park Recreation Sales Tax Fund. Any questions?
Questions for Penn? Yeah, Hillary?
Hi, Penn. I was just gonna see if there was any way that we could get some sort of general timeline for the vision of these parks associated with the planning. So kind of a master plan for the master plan, if you will. Just, how the timeline for people being able to expect when these different parks will come to fruition.
Okay, so if I understand, this is beyond the conceptual design element and more of implementing what we're conceptualizing, right? Yeah, we can absolutely do that.
And I know it may not be, hard numbers, or, it may not be 100% on track, but, I see 10 plus years, and I think, are we talking Streamway 30 years from now? Or what's the timeline there? And
Right.
if it's just a, guesstimate on a table, that would just help me kind of better piece it all together.
Okay.
And I think that getting through the conceptual master planning at each individual park level will help develop that as well, because ultimately in part if you break it down and sort of try to do as close to an apples comparison as with the street program, we're looking at, on the streets, we were figuring out condition and appropriate treatment. In this case, we're going through and thinking about what amenities we're going to add. And then we can start to really build out and say, how quickly do you want to move through that, right? And then what funding level is required to achieve that. So once we have those plans, we'll be able to create that overall vision and map and timeline, so that you would be able to, similar to how we're saying your street's going to be done in 2023 or 2024, we'd be able to say the same thing about improvements to the outdoor park system.
And I had one other question. With these designs, I know that there were options for Mohawk, and I know there's kind of, various designs for Broadmoor already underway. But, say each of these parks come back at, $3 to $7 million to do, right? Realistic timelines on, there's just never going to be that much money to do all these parks in a realistic time, in a timeline that's, anything that we would all experience in our lifetimes. So I'm wondering if maybe with these concepts, if there could be like a light and a medium and a heavy in terms of costs. And maybe that's already something you're thinking about, but I think that would be nice, because we could say, we really love this one, even though it costs $3 million, we have to do this one. This is great, but here's what we could do at this park to make sure we're touching it. That's something that I think could help us, gauge to different scales.
Yeah, I would agree with Hillary's comment on that. And I had some discussion with Laura about, how do we keep those conceptual plans, realistic? And I have particular concerns on that front about Streamway and Waterworks, and keeping in mind that we don't own those properties. And they also, especially Streamway, has significant access issues. So I think, thinking on the outset as we're doing these concepts, what's realistic or what makes sense to invest in a park that we don't own, and keeping that in mind as well.
Yeah,
I'm a stakeholder in the Broadmoor Park committee. And I've got to be honest with you, everybody that is involved in it has been absolutely fantastic. They're not looking for gold pathways. They said the restrooms are great for a park. So, you know, I think that we need to go ahead and really give a lot of kudos to the people that are in the stakeholders committee. And I really have got to say great things about Penn about leading that. So I just wanted to go ahead and say thank you for that.
Yeah, and I think the Mohawk one similarly went really well. And yeah, so thank you to Penn for his leadership on that. And thank you to our members of the public for, you know, their engagement and participation.
My pleasure. I appreciate it. I'm completely in support of that. I believe the idea with each of these conceptual designs is to build in that scalability. So we've discussed various meetings, the phasing element. And I believe once you get this conceptual design, it is always available and open to discuss whether that still fits within the city of Mission, whether this fence is wrought iron or whether it's a wood post, you know. And so all of these elements are absolutely scalable. And I believe we can include that as part of kind of our timeline deliverable.
Any other questions or comments for Penn?
No.
Debbie?
I would add,
I just wanna say-
Councilmember Flora, I've been in discussions with the state of Kansas. Sorry, Councilmember Kring.
Okay.
But I've been in discussions with the Streamway owners, and they've been very amenable to any changes that we've had. They've just asked that we have them outlined in pictorial versions so that we can, you know, kind of comb through it a little bit more detail once they're finalized.
Great.
They don't anticipate changing that agreement, but obviously just want to be in touch with us throughout each phase of discussion.
That's good to hear. Debbie, did you have a question?
Sure. Well, I want to thank Penn for everything he's doing for our park system, because I think it makes a big difference. Not only does he have the credibility, but I think people look up to him and they look to him for advice on any kind of park issues. I also want to follow up with Kristen on where we are on Broadmoor. I have some real interest in that and have had, you know, a couple different constituents concerned about that potential wetland and wonder where we're going to go with that at some point. So I will follow up later, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilmember Kring.
Penn has a 30-page document on that swall, so I'm sure he'll be glad to share that with you.
Okay.
That's great.
I don't think you have to wait for the stakeholder group on that. I think we're moving that one on down the road as we speak.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to give you a little bit more insight, Councilmember Kring, I met with a gentleman who's going to meet with us on site in the spring at Broadmoor Park and give us a detailed area view of what we need to cut out, what we need to replant, and just to get it thriving again and get it to the point where it's not 6 feet and higher growth, but more in that 3 to 3.5 foot range that it was intended to be.
Recommend we take this to consent.
All right, everyone good with that? All right. That is the end of our action items. We don't have any discussion items this evening. Our last thing would be department updates from Laura.
Yes, thank you. And I will just very quickly touch on a couple of things that will happen before we are together again next week, and then we'll save any more detailed updates for then or for the 16th. But just a reminder that because of COVID, we've had to pivot on our typical holiday lights event. And so this year we will be hosting a virtual tree lighting with the mayor and Santa that I believe begins at 5:15 on this coming Friday. We'll light the tree and then Santa will be available to wave at families as they take advantage of a drive-through s'more kit pickup, and you can go take the s'mores home and make them at your leisure. So not quite what we had hoped for this year, but certainly a way to kick off a holiday season. And then next Monday at 11:30, also done through a virtual format, will be our annual Pearl Harbor Remembrance ceremony. So that link will be available again beginning at 11:30. And then just a reminder, so we will have a follow-up committee meeting next Wednesday. We'll start at 6:30, and it will be, because all of the items that are carryover were on the Finance and Administration Committee agenda, it will be a Finance and Administration Committee meeting. And I believe that it makes the most sense since we will have, the mayor has arranged for the representatives from the school district to be here. We'll lead with that issue. Then second on the agenda will be our discussions surrounding the Mission Bowl TIF. And then we'll follow up with the enforcement agreement with Johnson County on their public health order, and continued discussion around protocols at the community center. And that's all I have.
Is that at 6:30?
Yes, 6:30.
All right. Thank you, Laura. Any questions? Are we all good, everybody?
Good short meeting, Solid. Good job.
All right. It is now 9:34 p.m. and with no further discussion, that will conclude the meeting of the Community Development Committee. Again, the video will be on the website, missionks.org.
Good night, everybody.
Good night,
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.